This is interesting. So I've been recording the entire thing, but the stream cut out at some point.
Uh-oh.
I record a copy just in case the stream doesn't. Huh. Let's see. I'm not 45. Oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay, so I recorded the first 45 minutes of this, but it wasn't streaming that entire time.
No way.
That's hysterical. Well, it's a good thing I record. I also record to that, just in case.
Gotcha.
Well, that is interesting.
So we've been talking to nobody for almost an hour.
We've been talking to nobody for about 45 minutes, except for the recording, which I have on here.
Gotcha.
That's hysterical.
So now we're live.
45 minutes recording instead of streaming.
Right, well, we got our practice run in.
Yeah, I apparently you have to hit go live on YouTube in addition to start streaming now.
Gotcha.
I never had to do that before. Okay, that's funny. That's actually funny. Well, you'll see the first 45 minutes of this when I get back home.
Hey, we're warmed up. We're ready to go.
Okay, so down the list.
All right.
This is funny.
So you want to start on a specific model, or you just want to start with problems?
I would just start with problems.
All right. So let's talk about bearings. So there have been two major models of bearings we've seen on the Onewheel. So there is an NSK bearing, which are these guys, identified by a brown seal.
Mm-hmm.
And there are CNU bearings, identified by a black seal. Do you want to take any guess as to the cost, roughly, of what each of those pairs of bearings are?
$30, $20.
About 15 to 30 for those. You want to guess what those are?
15 to 30 for this.
Yep.
And this is no idea.
And this is per pair. Those are, about less than $5.
What makes the difference?
Take one, put it next to your ear and shake it. And do the same with the other. You should hear the balls rotating around or shaking around inside that bearing. It's just a lower tolerance, cheaper model bearing of the same size. So what that means is we see these guys fail a lot more frequently than we see these guys fail, and exposed to the same conditions. So when those bearings are failing, there is a possibility for the races to catch, and those races are steel. Steel is a lot harder than aluminum. So when you have steel catch on aluminum, what do you think it does? It strips. So you have a bearing that goes out of tolerance, and it will completely eat away the axle of the board. This then introduces additional problems where the motor can come out of alignment, and now you're scraping the rotor on the magnets within the motor, or the magnets on this guy. So it can completely tear itself apart. And you have two options. Send it into Future Motion, pull off all your aftermarket accessories so you don't lose them, wait for the board to get back in a couple weeks. Or take it to a local shop, or do it yourself, pull the bearings off, hopefully before that amount of damage occurs, push new higher quality bearings on, and be on your way.
Wow.
So those CNU bearings were introduced on the XR. They're now present on the Pint, and we see the same exact model bearing on the GT.
So the cheaper one.
The cheaper one, correct.
And which model is the one that had the good bearings?
That switched around about 4208 on the XR. 4208 to 4209.
Do those go for more money? Do enough people know that those were built with better bearings for them?
So the reason that there's a discrepancy in the evaluation of XRs, given that visually they're equivalent, is the hardware and the firmware version. That's the number one thing an educated buyer is going to want to know, because a older version of the board will have less of those software locks that we just talked about over those 45 minutes. And when those firmware and hardware restrictions are not present, you can do more with the product you own, be it putting in aftermarket batteries as a major example as to what you can do. So going down the list here, we can talk about headlight ferrites. This is another fun one. Every XR that has been sold has a wire coming off right here that connects into the headlight. And on this headlight, there is a weighted ferrite. So if you want to feel that, it's got a decent amount of mass to it. That wire, even though the headlight on the front is exactly the same brightness and intensity as the rear, the headlight is the only one with that weight on it. That weight is unfastened within the controller. So when you're riding around this board, it's shaking, it's vibrating, it's not gentle. That weight is tugging on both of those connectors.
What's the point of that?
So the point, it's to pull off like EMI of the cable, but it's a 5-volt cable, or a 5-volt line. So it's not relatively putting off that much. We don't know specific amounts. Again, we don't have any documentation, schematics, or information on the board, but the common solution that we do is you can replace that cable, because what's going to happen is it'll rip out of the connector, and now you have this weight freely moving around inside of the enclosure. So we take these guys here, which is a shielded cable, and feel free to give that a shake. It's a lot lighter weight, so you're not going to be ripping at either of those connectors.
This seems like a better way to shield the cable.
My opinion says the same.
I've never seen that before.
Yep. So it is a.
I've never. So the idea is to keep.
Yep. Feel free to pull it out.
These two in front of the camera.
Yep.
Oh man. Okay. So check this out. Properly shielded cable. Kopaz shielded cable. This feels like an ankle weight around it.
It's quite heavy.
Why?
So yep, exact same connectors, exact same length, plugs right into the headlight. We don't see the problems inherent with the weighted ring that we do with the shielded cable. It effectively fixes that problem. If we want to stay on the same topic of the XR controller, another thing you'll notice, so we have the bulkhead connector connecting to the battery box. We have the motor phase connector connecting to the motor. We have the motor phase feedback connecting to the motor as well. And we have the footpad connector. You'll notice that those two ports right there are on their own little daughter board. Those have pins connecting the switchcraft connector to that little PCB, and those PCBs are attached to the main board. Keep in mind that there is an enclosure in between here, and those nuts do lock it to that enclosure, but those are still free to flex back and forth.
So how long before these need to be resoldered?
It's entirely dependent on the conditions that the rider is riding in, as well as the intensity at which they're riding.
How often do you do that?
This is one of the more frequent things that I have to fix. So if any signal from the motor feedback dips out, the motor's going to lock in place. It's going to toss the rider. If any signal from the footpad connector dips out, if you're in the right conditions, the nose is going to dip without warning. It's going to throw the rider.
So if there's a problem with this solder connection on something that does this,
what's more common, so the flexure isn't really that big of a problem specifically. It's that you have a connector. So this is the end that plugs into it. Sorry, everything's a mess. So that plugs in there. Right? I don't know if that's visible on camera. That's a decent amount of leverage to flex the switchcraft component on the daughter board it's mated to. So those pins on the back side there crack more frequently than the daughter board cracks from the main board.
Jeez.
So touching those up is extremely important, and it's something we've had to do on 4206s, 8s, 9s, and 10s. This was one of, to FM's credit, a very good thing that they fixed on 4211, 12s, and 13s. Notice the redesign of the board.
This is much different. So let me get this in front of camera.
Yep, absolutely.
So you have this, which just kind of shakes around.
Turn on this light too so you can get a little better view.
Quality camera work. And then you have the newer one over here. It's got these two little metal pieces over here that keep it on. That makes it much more rigid.
Yep, so this fixes the flexure of the daughter board to the main board. And you can also see, in addition to this, there is additional solder covering those pins. So that's the same thing that we have to do to fix it, is just add more meat to that joint to prevent it from cracking when it will inevitably flex due to riding. This change is also observed on the Pint. So you can see it's got effectively the same board design on it. And from the photos that at least I personally have seen up to this point, it looks like the GT has the same exact implementation. That over there. All right, so we've covered bearings, we've covered stripped rails, or stripped axles, we've covered the switchcrafts, we've covered broken rims. BMS, you've already talked about the charge connector. I don't feel like we need to go over that in amazing detail. Plug order and timing. So it's not enough that if you want to switch out this board now, that you just unplug the wires any which way you want. There's a specific order to how you unplug this and a specific timing you have to do so.
What happens?
Relative timing, you'll fry the board. You'll damage something. whatever reasons exist to make it so, I'm not interested in. I'm interested in figuring out the right way to do it so I don't damage my and other people's parts. But otherwise, you do run the risk of damaging the board or the pack itself.
Do you know what the order is? Does anybody?
I do know the order, yes. We can talk about the order some other time, but you effectively move from a balance to XT60 when unplugging and the opposite direction, moving back with specific timing intervals in between.
And if you don't, it bricks itself.
It has the possibility to. It's not guaranteed to. There are certain instances where it can occur. The known causes aren't explicit, but there are known cases where if you unplug or replug in the incorrect order or timing, certain things can break. Again, we don't know specifics on it because we don't have any documentation aside from what we develop completely from experience.
So, like, how does this work? Do you just buy 20 of this and then just go, okay, that's not it. Just burn that, couple of $100 and then just keep doing it over and over?
Either on boards that you purchase or customer boards.
That sucks.
This is unfortunately how we've had to learn these things.
That sucks.
So the demand for the product doesn't disappear, and there's a need for service that exists. And when that service is not...
Chris says we are all beta testers.
To some degree. Cool. So we've talked about the reverse XT60 polarity as well. If we want to talk about the controller, we've gone through the overhaul. So everything we just talked about right there was XR. Right? So that was the XR controller with the differences in the motor PCB or the Switchcraft PCBs. If we want to get into the pint. So there's a pretty drastic visual difference with the pint and the XR, and that difference also carries over into the component level design.
JW Electric Batteries says the order is important because they didn't design to the specs of the Max chip on the BMS.
Yep, so that's possible. I don't know the specifics to comment on that.
JW, that's JW. That's the same as the guy who makes the chip.
That's right. Yeah, Jim and Wes know their stuff.
Royalty is here.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Yeah, they would be what I would consider experts in this field. All right, so differences in visual design. So there's been hopefully an observable pattern from when we talked about the V1 to the Plus to the XR, right? You have two milled rails going down the sides. You have two enclosures that are gasketed and sealed together, right? You have the same thing on the pint, but the implementation is different, right? You now have like a nitrile rubber O-ring. You have a cast aluminum top instead of a pressed piece of sheet for the top. You have enclosures where the wiring runs in different locations. It's overall a drastically different approach to how to build a one wheel. And it's evident that a lot more forethought has been put in to make this seem like a product, not a prototype. And as a result, different problems exist. So like we talked about, the software pairing from all the XR revisions is present on the pint as well. But specific to the pint is yet another problem that you have touched on already, which is that controller nut. So if we crack this guy open here, and I'm not doing anything special or dangerous, I'm simply grabbing a Torx bit out of my screwdriver to spin screws that have changed from hex to safety Torx.
Safety Torx.
Safety Torx. So they have, exactly. So we're being very safe right now by turning these screws. As you can see, it has a little dot in the middle to prevent a standard Torx from turning this bolt.
Well, it didn't succeed in keeping you out.
It hasn't yet.
Because you can buy that at Home Depot.
Absolutely. And even further, so if you look at, I'll continue this conversation, this is what I call the OHB, outer hub bolt for the XR. Mm-hmm. Just a standard hex bolt, nothing special. That is the OHB for a pint. So it is another Torx bit, thankfully not security Torx, but if you lost, cracked, or broke one of those pint hub bolts and you went to go buy another one, you couldn't. That's a custom manufactured bolt. And notice how thin the head is on that bolt, right? So it is easier to strip out that than a typical hex bolt, and it is more likely to break the head off the bolt if you torque it correctly, or if you torque it incorrectly for install or removal.
For $2,000, I damn well expect the battery to be replaceable without unplugging it, bricking it. That's just straight BS, says JP. During Mario's interview, I was reading questions from the chat, and that's how I knew it was working. And somebody said,
absolutely.
Don't look at it while you're talking to the person. And this time I didn't look at chat, which is why I didn't realize the first 41 minutes were not streaming. So I learned a lesson, which is never listen to them. Never listen to them.
Just means we get to practice that first time. We'll go over it again.
I'm gonna upload the entire thing once I'm done.
Cool. So we'll now pull the lid off of this pint. You notice the same thing on the back. So we have a separate O-ring that goes around the perimeter, and we have the internals of the pint enclosure. You notice the power button, which is plastic threads, is held on with a metal nut. Here, if you want to pick this up, move over there, you can do that as well. You have a metal nut right there that secures the back of that power button. Again, these boards are vibrating and shaking around the whole time that they're being used. That nut works itself loose. Just give it a feel how thin those wires are.
Wow.
That's now supporting the entire weight of that metal nut. And what is directly beneath that is the Bluetooth module.
So I'm guessing a lot of people don't have Bluetooth.
You would be correct in that assumption. So that's actually the reason that this board is dead right here. And you can see the physical damage. That's actually very moderate for where that nut just repeatedly collides into that board.
Let's get this in focus.
So depending on the level of damage to that board, you can either lose partial or full Bluetooth connectivity, or it can just kill the board entirely.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the scratches are all showing up on camera, but you could feel it over there. Ouch.
So this is one of the... This is a fun topic. This is one of the smaller cases of wear. If you want to look at one that's considerably larger, I actually have photos on the tablet that I have already misplaced. Over there. Can I sneak by here? So the XR, which is notoriously the board that is ridden harder because it is larger, it's more stable at speed, and it can reach a higher top speed than the pint. Notice how the enclosure is designed, right? See all those little ribs in the back side of there to support the board? Again, this board, this PCB, this BMS, sits on the back side of this here and is in physical contact with those ribs. And if this whole board is vibrating around and shaking, you can assume that there's going to be some amount of wear on the back of that BMS, right? You can see there. But it will actually eat all the way through the back of that BMS and tear the traces out. Yep, go for it. So I don't happen to have one of those BMSs specifically in for repair right now, but whatever that trace is responsible for, that signal is now severed.
My question is a complete noob on this. For a company like this, it would be sustainable to live just out of the sales without a recurring stream of revenue? Is this just shameless greed, or is this just how things have to work? I mean, there seems to be a lot of demand for this.
There's an extreme amount of demand for this. Yep. So there's a couple 100,000 of these boards that exist now, and they're only getting more popular.
It's hard for me to imagine that one service center would be able to service all of these, even if they wanted all the repair revenue.
I would be significantly impressed if any one person or one place could do all of the things that are needed on these boards. Because if you're talking just about the U.S. alone, there's a constant demand, not only for the repairs, but for the modifications that people are after.
I imagine they're not doing any of the modifications.
No, if it is not manufactured by FM, they won't touch it.
One thing we went over in the beginning of this that is going to be uploaded later is that if you send your board back for an unrelated repair and you've replaced a tire on it, that's considered a modification. You may either A, get declined repair, or B, have a stock tire put on your board and be billed for it.
And C, have your warranty voided.
Your warranty, is that, how sure are you of that?
Of the tire being...
Of the warranty being voided from the tire.
So it is possible. It depends on the level of modification done to the board. From my personal understanding, it is possible that your warranty can be voided by putting an aftermarket tire onto the board.
Because one of the things I said in the part that you'll see uploaded later is I completely understand somebody saying, I don't know, you've modified the gearing or the transmission on your car, you've changed the engine or something, but replacing a tire with, like, going from a Michelin tire to a Continental tire, that's really not, that should not be a warranty voiding event, nor should that be, I don't even consider that modification.
In my opinion, any wear component that needs to be replaced should not void your warranty.
It's like a Shimano versus a Gecker's brake pad. I mean,
right, be it the battery, the tire, or the grip tape. Those are all wear components.
And if you have different ones on there, they'll put the stock ones on there and
correct
bill you for it. Stoke Life Service is John Stock. Yes. Do you know John Stock?
I do know John. John's one of my good friends.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so if you have a preference towards the OEM tire or any aftermarket tire whatsoever, you can bring it into any participating SLS location, any repair shop, and have that tire replaced in 30, 45 minutes at most. As to where if you want that tire switched by the manufacturer, you got to pack that board up in a box, you got to ship it out to Santa Cruz, and you got to wait potentially a couple weeks to a month to have it back.
That's insane.
Yeah, for what I consider to be a wear component, and I think most people consider to be a wear component.
I would consider that to be a wear component.
Yep.
What's next?
All right. So we talked about the pint power button, motor phases. So if we pull out the XR stator, so again, these are the ports that plug into the controller. You have your feedback port, same switchcraft that's used on the footpad, and you have your motor phases. Notice how it is 6 pins. Each motor phase, UVW, gets 2 individual pins. If you look at the pint, however, of which I have a nice severed cable, everything is baked into one cord. So you now have all of the feedback signals and the motor phase power delivered through that same one cord. And there is now 1 pin per phase. So when you push the nose down on the pint really hard, expelling a lot of battery to spin the motor, or if you brake hard when you're moving and have a significant amount of energy coming back from the motor to regen the battery, that amount of power can pop and fry one or multiple of those motor phase pins.
Those are small.
Those are very small.
So how much power is typically going through this, like a max? Like if you were going at max speed.
So the motor is advertised as a 750 watt motor. They have advertised between 1, 2, and 3 horsepower
There's
on
more
the
copper on a BBS HD on one phase than there is on all 3 phases here.
Right. So they have advertised 1, 2, and 3 horsepower across the pint, the XR, and now the GT. All 3 of those boards use that exact stator. That chunk right there is identical on all 3 models. The only thing that changes, it's fine. The only thing that changes is that motor harness, and now with the GT, the axle in between.
Jeez. Brushed motor or brushless, as Wes?
So it is a brushless motor.
You don't know my budget, George Zavala. Bite me, long live right to repair. Well, thank you, Lilsru. 750 watt motor, hell no. Yeah, that looks very small for 750 watt. Next.
Yeah. So, continuing further with this discussion. So, there's safety and redundancy, right? You're sharing that load across 2 pins for any one phase. They have separate wires running halfway up this harness that converge into a single wire to go through, and that's how you connect to your motor phases. The pint, again, this is exactly the same on the pint. That's all shared over 1 cable. That is relatively less power usage than an XR, and you can see that pin fry more commonly on a pint, which it's actually what happened to this board as well, will blow out one of the motor phases and fry all sorts of stuff in here. And then this is effectively dead, right? This is unrepairable, especially if the list of components that fry include the MCU, the main controller on the board. The GT uses a derivative of that connector. It's that with further keying measures taken to it. So you still have that single phase per 1 contact.
What do you mean by more keying phases?
So the geometry of the port has special cutouts in it to prevent this connector from being used. So you can't reuse the pint for electrical reasons. You can't reuse the pint stator and just drop it and plug in to the GT. Additionally, the axle, the piece pressed into the stator, is different. The XR and the pint, they're relatively the same size. They're interchangeable without modification. The GT is a whole 1/2 inch longer, and the bearing seat changes dimension as well. This is done to prevent existing hubs from being put onto the GT. So that means you're forced to use that 6.5 inch hub, and therefore forced to use the only offered 6.5 inch tire provided by the manufacturer.
That's horrible.
I would agree.
I don't have any more words for that. I got an advertisement for the Onewheel GT on this stream. I don't think the AI recommending ads is very smart.
Yeah, I get Onewheel ads on every piece of content I view now.
Thank you, John Stock.
What's John got to say?
Thank me when I don't hit. Thank me when I don't hit go live 42 minutes into a stream.
Hey, we're here now.
But I'm gonna upload the entire thing later, so you'll see. Why is next?
All right. So we've talked a lot about the Plus. We've talked a lot about the XR. We've talked a lot about the Pint. All those things are previous to you learning all these fun things about Onewheel. Let's talk about what's pertinent now. You have the Pint X. You have the GT. FM takes a similar approach to releasing new products in that it's largely similar to the existing model, but adds more range, right? So the Plus expanded upon the V1 by about doubling its range. The XR expanded on the Plus by about doubling its range. And the Pint X expands upon the Pint by about doubling its range. And with that, the biggest thing that's changed with the Pint uses what I personally understand to be the same exact controller and the same exact BMS, aside from a few firmware differences. The difference is you get a battery about double that size. I unfortunately don't have one here to show you, but that battery is significantly thicker and the back of the board is thicker to accommodate, meaning it has a different, wherever I put it, rear enclosure.
Did they ever in the newer models change the whole XT60 being backwards thing?
To my understanding, that has never been changed.
I would never want a Onewheel for somebody who's used to only working on Onewheels to touch my bike because I just have a feeling that they'd have that as a habit.
Yeah,
and
it's possible.
And then there would be a fire. But like, because
so
I guarantee I would not remember this. This whole flat side being ground is just, that's not right.
I would personally agree. There very well may be reasons behind it, but again, we have no schematics, we have no documentation, we have no knowledge as to why that decision was made.
That's crazy.
So, like I was saying, the Pine X is about double this size. Mm-hmm. The location for where these two cables here, providing your power through the XT60, are roughly in the same area, but the position changes. So, if you look at the Pint battery box, we're really piling on the parts here. You see there's a rib that those wires must curl around. Mm-hmm. Those wire lengths are not appropriately sized on the Pine X.
Is that why there's a indentation over here?
That would be. On the
Can
Pine
I zoom
X,
in on that indentation?
absolutely.
Let's see.
So, and the reason for that is there's a cover that seats over the BMS. So that's going to effectively sandwich that wire in there.
Let's see.
Whoop.
Lighting? Yeah.
I don't know if you can see it. I can try and point to it if it helps.
Zoom? Let's see how much zoom
Right
I get on
about there.
Yeah.
You can see it now? Right.
Yeah, I can see it in the viewfinder. So how does that happen?
So that is due to a PCB or a BMS cover. That's this guy right here.
Uh-huh.
So this is a plate that mounts over top of the BMS to quote unquote protect it. What is possible is whether, assembled from the manufacturer or at the discretion of the user, this can potentially pinch those cables. This isn't, it's a problem. Let's clarify. It's a problem on this board as well as the Pint X. It's not as significant on the Pint as it is the Pint X because the length for those cables is not appropriately sized, in my personal opinion, for the Pint X.
Well, you can see it's stretching around there.
Right. So what happens...
I like how you say in my personal opinion.
So what the problem is on the Pint X is that those wires fall under such significant tension that they will tear out from the battery. So you will have the negative terminal or the positive, whatever one's under tension, will physically disconnect from the pack itself. It'll rip off that solder connection. This can happen when you're riding, under which circumstances the board's no longer going to be powered. It will instantly power off without warning.
And in that post that they made in response, they were saying that the reason that they have to, we can't have anybody else touching this, the reason that it's so important that the battery brick itself if you unplug it, is because we have these rigorous standards and these advanced testing methodologies, high quality, robust components, and yet this made it out of there.
Yeah, so I agree. Batteries can be dangerous. They are not guaranteed to be dangerous, but when certain practices
like this,
similar to this, occur, it does introduce danger into the mix.
Dude, I never thought I'd see worse wiring than what's on my homemade electric bike from this. It's literally, it's not, there's a channel that could be going through, and instead of going through a channel, it's just going straight on top of it.
The opportunity to design it for that existed when this entire product was developed
Can I just show this one more time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hold that up. Let's see how, let's test the zoom on my crappy little AX53 here.
I'll try to hold as still as possible.
All right.
We're looking right above where my thumb is,
Okay.
which is completely out of frame.
There.
Oh, right there.
Yeah, so do you
If you wanna
see how
point to it.
this? There's a plastic piece in here, and
If you want to grab that plastic piece, it's right on the desk underneath your hand.
I mean, there's a plastic piece right here. There's a black plastic piece.
Yep, so it has
it's
a-
going over it.
Correct. It has a little bit of a tray it sits into. And if you look underneath that tray, notice that ribbing that we saw in the XR is not present here. So that ribbing that wore into the XR is not a problem on the Pint because those ribs do not exist.
Nice. Hey, I would likely be more forgiving of this if they weren't saying that you mere mortal idiot should not be allowed to touch this because we have a special way of doing it.
Yeah, so it can be frustrating for people in my position to hear that we're untrustable garage shops when we're the ones that have to identify and fix a lot of the problems that we see. You do have the option to get it back to the manufacturer then to fix it, but from what we've seen, I personally wouldn't trust it.
Everyone makes mistakes. Technicians make mistakes. Designers make mistakes. The OEM technicians are going to make mistakes. But what's bothersome is when they pretend that they are this magical, different species of human being. When they
Right. So it's actually a very good point you bring up. So nobody expects anybody to be perfect, FM specifically, in this situation. And if you look at other manufacturers, a popular model EUC called the S20 by Kingsong, new product that is coming to market. There's a demo unit in the US, most recently in New York City, and they had a problem where wheel went down, wouldn't turn on, started to jut, sputter a little bit, and then it just caught on fire. Within 24 hours from that occurring, there was a public and official statement made by Kingsong, not only acknowledging the problem, but talking about the measures they have already taken to fix it. That's something we've never seen from FM, ever. So we're aware that they know of these problems. For instance, the daughter board connections on the 4211 that have been fixed. We're aware they know of those problems and fix them, but it doesn't always happen to every problem that's discovered, and it never gets told to the customer that this is being fixed in the next model. If there's a new revision, hardware or software wise, or hardware or firmware wise to an XR, there's never an alert that gets put out for it. We simply see that someone's going to post statistics on their board. Oh, I got a new hardware and firmware revision.
The engineer in me says that these are prototypes. They just are not engineered for production. Josh is pointing out fundamental design issues which must cause a real headache. Huh.
Yeah, so if we want to expand that design issue problem a little further, if you have a problem with a design issue and you go back to the manufacturer, I wouldn't say you're getting it fixed, again, in my opinion, because you're going to get the same exact system present that caused the problem in the first place. So
this is the thing that was frustrating with Apple when they were replacing the 2011 GPU boards, the 820-2915 boards. You were getting another board that not only had the same GPU, but often the BGA rework process that they were using, they looked roasted.
Yeah.
This is not my opinion, by the way. If anybody at Apple is watching, this is the fucking truth. Which you could watch, when I was, anybody who opens those machines when they're a refurb, you could see that under the GPU, they are more brown than they were originally. Yep. And those refurb boards would last for a shorter period of time than the originals.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we want to stay in the example of this problem, the way that we would fix this, or I guess myself personally would fix this, is I'd be notching out that part of that tray that's causing that strain, right? I'm not going to replace it with another pack to continue to be strained by that feature. I'm going to remove it.
Yeah, it's just
I do the same thing there.
Or like with the butterfly keyboards Apple would do. They would replace the keyboard with another keyboard. They said it was different, but they would fail less than a year later.
Yeah.
And then when you would take it apart, you go, this looks like the same keyboard that was in there originally.
Yeah, so that same type of problem has potential to exist if you send back to the manufacturer for a new enclosure, or if your 30Q battery pack goes out of spec, you send it back in and they replace it with another 30Q.
And what was interesting is when they would say when they say that we have this high quality, high testing, advanced, whatever corporate wankery way of doing things better than you, it's usually the independent repair community that will actually say, if I were to do this, I would put a notch there. Or for instance, it was the independent repair community that would say, instead of putting a piece of rubber there, we're going to resolder this properly. Instead of replacing your entire board with another one that uses the same C9560 tantalum cap in the 2010 MacBook Pros that were crashing, we would say, we're not going to use the tantalum cap there. We're going to use this one, which is same value, different composition, and it doesn't happen again. And so you're finding out the issues, and it has to be incredibly frustrating when you're the one figuring out issues that they haven't figured out yet, but you're the one that's the idiot working out of his garage that shouldn't be trusted.
Yeah, it feels like we're the ones that are inheriting all the risk, and to do R&D effectively to find these problems.
Yeah, and again, everybody's going to make mistakes. If I tried to engineer one of these, I'm sure I'd make dozens and millions of mistakes. But I'm not going to say we. But what crosses the line is when they say we are uniquely, we are uniquely intelligent and qualified to do all of this work that you peons can't. And that's where it becomes really offensive. And that's where it's like, okay, cool. If you're saying that we are too stupid to do this work, let's go over what your quality is. Let's examine it.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah. So I never intended to get into the service space for Onewheels. I simply bought the product like everyone else did. They thought it was cool and they thought it would be a ton of fun, and it absolutely proved valuable in that regard. However, I began to have problems with my board, and sending out to the manufacturer wasn't financially viable. Right? I couldn't afford at that point to send the board out for repair, and there was nobody local to me who was able to repair them. So I had to teach myself how to do a lot of the things that I currently know how to do. A lot of them actually learned through your channel with solder rework and similar skills. But then you sort of combine forces with other people doing the same, and that allows you to build a strong foundation of information with a network of people equivalently, if not more capable than you are. And together, as a whole organization, SLS specifically, you're able to put a significant impact into the lives of the riders who own these boards by providing things the manufacturer either chooses not to or is incapable of doing.
Because if you do these repairs and you actually do them properly to where it's better than it was how it was designed, then there's a lesser likelihood of you taking a nosedive, which is one of the reasons I've stuck to the e-bike side.
Yeah, it's certainly a risk that's incurred with the product.
JW Battery says Future Motion has increased the battery capacity in its current generation of products and will continue to add more anti-circumvention measures to make it difficult or impossible to use aftermarket batteries. Future Motion to my attorneys. You're up next, JW Batteries. I have your email, but
that's going to be a fun conversation.
That's going to be a very fun conversation.
I'm very much looking forward to that. But like Jim's saying, so they are upping the battery capacity with just about every successive model we've seen. Like we said, the Plus doubled the V1, the XR doubled the Plus, and the Pint X doubles the Pint. There's inherent problems that have occurred with some sort of a pattern across those generations to where we don't see the problems being fixed. So like what we've been talking about, we find ways to fix them ourselves.
And what's interesting, when they say that this is being done for your safety, if that's the case, I mean, maybe this is just me being salty, but if that's the case, then what about all the other items you were introduced with lithium-ion batteries? Are you just recalling them all because they're unsafe because somebody may be able to replace it?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a hard problem.
Should those now be illegal? I mean, should the older Onewheels be considered illegal because the company is saying, the GT, we're doing this for your safety to prevent you from being able to replace the battery?
No, I don't think so at all.
I mean, I don't think even they would say that.
Right. This is, such a hard problem to solve that many other manufacturers have already solved it. So I can go to certain EUC, e-bike, and e-scooter manufacturers, and if I have a customer in here with a dead BMS or a broken motor or a bad controller, I can buy a new one, I can drop it in, I can test it, confirm it works, and the customer's on their way, often cheaper and faster than it would be to go to the manufacturer.
What do you have next?
Let's find out.
So thank you, JW. That is way too generous.
Yeah, so I have a whole bunch of notes we can talk about with the GT. I don't have one of them in here for us to point at and look at, but we can start to talk about some of the things that we as a community have seen and what it could potentially mean. Or we can take some questions if that's of preference.
I'm going to take a look and see if there's any interesting questions here.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to
seeing
what people have to
patents
say.
and competition? We went over that in the beginning part, but
yeah. So FM has a lot of patents over this. So that is the largest reason that I believe they don't have any competition. There's a few other, products that come from like China that are of similar form factor, but FM's true value is the software.
I've heard people say that the patents expire sometime in 2035.
Around then.
Somebody asked when they expire. Basic. Hello. Well, manufacturers should encourage mod communities for free research and development, and so they can sell mod parts too. Yeah, because you're the people that are going to find the issues before they do, because you're the ones that are being asked to fix it on a regular basis.
With certain issues, we believe we are the ones who find those issues first.
Send them a snapshot of my bank account. I was going to buy 2 of them, but I saw this video, and then Leonard's and decided to tell them they lost 2 customers. Sad. The thing is, I don't think most people that actually own these products or repair them want the company to fail. They want the company to change and be better.
To be fully clear, nobody wants FM to fail. At least it is my understanding. I want FM to succeed more than most, right? They produce the most fantastic product I have ever seen. And with this growing community of extremely passionate people in this niche industry, there needs to be a different approach to keep this product growth sustainable. And the current system, while it may have worked in the past, I think that there's a clear enough evidence that it doesn't work now and change is necessary.
Yeah, I don't want them to fail as a company. I'd want them to change and start treating their community,
Absolutely.
their repair community, and their customers better.
Right. We all want the same thing. We want to be able to ride more places and ride with more people.
But I also want people that are looking at buying this to be able to be educated in what the issues are
Absolutely.
and what they're up against if they actually do want to do any sort of basic maintenance on their
Absolutely.
product. Because maybe, so what do you have next on the list?
So we can start talking about GT details.
Right.
I don't have one here, but we can at least engage in a verbal conversation. So have you had any discussions up until this point about pushback? Are you familiar with the concept?
Tell me more.
All right. So no matter how big the battery is in that thing or how big the motor is, there's going to be a finite amount of power it has to deliver to keep you moving and to keep the board under your feet when you're moving.
Now I understand. Is this the thing where like you have a certain amount of power to balance it and a certain amount for the motor? So
Correct.
if you use all of your power to accelerate, you have no power left to balance, in which
Correct.
case you're stuck balancing
There's two
yourself.
types of pushback. There's what I call operational pushback. This is when you are nearing the total output of the board's power. The board is going to accelerate more aggressively to lift the nose to give you a warning, hey, I'm getting close to my total output. And if you push me further, that nose is just going to dip. It doesn't have any more juice to give. The second type of pushback is like a warning style of pushback to where there's a problem and the board has determined, for whatever reasons may be, that the board needs to stop moving. So it's going to progressively lift the nose higher and higher and higher until the tail touches and you can no longer go forward. Specifically, the first type of pushback is what I believe most people are referring to when they talk about pushback, and there are different styles of this operational pushback. There's what's nicknamed XR pushback. This is most common on, obviously, the XR, but also the Plus and the V1. And then there's what's called pint pushback. The difference between them is the intensity at which the nose will lift and the tail will drop. The XR is a much more gentle experience to when you approach that maximum power output, the board will sort of gently lift the nose to warn you. And an experienced rider will prefer this because it doesn't jar them as heavily as pint pushback would be. So leading into pint pushback, if you get to the maximum output of the pint, it's going to raise the nose really quickly. It's going to be more pronounced to make it harder for you to notice. Harder for you to ignore. And as a result, there are situations where that can actually reduce your stability as the rider. So ever since the GT was announced, there's been a very big question in the community of what kind of pushback is the GT going to have. And from what we've seen with people who've owned the board already is it has an additional step above the significant pushback of the pint. So again, the pint tops at 15 miles an hour. The GT advertises a top of 19. So when you're going 19 miles an hour and that nose suddenly raises, it can throw you off guard a little bit. And keep in mind,
I have a concussion within 3 seconds.
yeah. So let's talk about what happens when you go downhill. So again, you're balancing on one wheel, right? And when you go downhill, you're accelerating. You're going down a hill potentially. If you hit that pushback point going downhill, the distance between the bumper and the ground is less, right? Because you're going downhill. And if you touch that bumper to the ground when you have pushback, the board's going to accelerate further. So it's of significant concern that the pushback is A, that steep, but B, that steep on a board designed to be taken off-road where that change in elevation is to be expected. So again, there's an obvious interest in making it more pronounced and therefore detectable to the rider. But with the amount of severity that the board currently has right now, it's perceived to introduce more risk than is necessary. Does that make sense?
Jeez. That's scary.
So the board has a lot more power, right? Again, it's the same motor, but you're cranking it from what they advertise about another 700 watts, right? It's a 3 horsepower motor they advertise, I believe. And that power needs to be dissipated somewhere. So again, this is an XR hub. It's a 6-inch diameter for the tire to seat on. Pint is again a 6-inch diameter, but the width is reduced. A GT is a 6.5. So it's a bigger mass to absorb that heat. And the axle again is larger to absorb that heat. We see overheating, or we as a community have seen overheating more frequently on the GT than we have on any other model.
Even though it has the larger...
Even though it has the larger hub. If we want to continue with temperature problems, these GTs only started shipping about 3 weeks ago, and they're arriving on delivery trucks in customers' houses, and that can be in a cold climate. When you get the board and you pull it out of the box and you go to turn it on, you're really excited. You just spent over $2,000 on a board. You press the button, doesn't turn on. So there are, again, from what I have personally seen looking into this, a significantly larger amount of boards that are arriving DOA from the factory. And the fix that, again, we as a community has found, because the manufacturer isn't telling us anything, is to leave it inside and let it warm up, and then it'll turn on.
What does the temperature have to do with it not being able to turn on?
It's a good question.
In a cold climate.
It's not explicitly known at this point. It's very hard to collect any information on the GT right now because we can't look into it.
EM3 EV batteries, they will turn off, I think, above 60 Celsius, and they turn off, I think, below 0. I'm not exactly sure if the numbers are right, but I know it has a cutoff point that's low and high to protect the battery so that it's not, to keep you from charging it below freezing and then resulting in dendrites and it exploding, which I appreciate, but it's just, they tell you that.
Yeah.
And there's also a color coding on it, which will tell you if it's too, and they ship you the manual with it, and so you could see if it's too hot or it's too cold. It'll blink and say,
so I don't know the explicit numbers off the top of my head, but there is an operational temperature range for the Onewheel. The temperatures that we're seeing these DOA problems at, up into the 30, 40, 50 degree range, anywhere in there, are, in my opinion, not adequate. I have ridden my XR to and from work every single day this entire winter through New England. I have never once had a temperature error.
And it is freezing here.
It is freezing here. It's gotten as cold as -20 riding in work.
It's ungodly cold here.
Yes. So, again, the cause is not known, but it's clearly a problem where people are having boards that are now temperature dependent.
Somebody thought it was a firmware issue in my chat earlier. The GT.
It's possible. Yeah, I mean, that temperature threshold, if it's not a physical problem, would be firmware defined.
And there's a lot of people have been talking about ghosting with it as well.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. So if we want to talk about ghosting issues, so this is an XR footpad. Notice how it is very flat, right? There's no curvature in this plane or this direction. And just the pint is about the same. So if we look at pint here, also notice it's got a very flat front footpad, right? The GT has a concave footpad. The reason being a concave footpad, if you ask riders who ride quite frequently, will provide more control, right? You're going to have more leverage over the edges of the board to dictate how you turn left and right. The GT is the first Onewheel to ship from Future Motion with a concave footpad stock. This is of interest to riders on the website when you're looking to buy the board, because a concave footpad is something that has been notoriously difficult to either modify or expand upon with the stock sensor. Because if you look at the sensor, this is what they look like on the XR. It's best to think about it like a sandwich, right? You have a layer of conductors this way, and you have a layer of conductors this way. And when they touch together, you have continuity through, and that's your signal, right? And the XR, all Onewheels have a left and a right sensor. And there's certain logic to what combination of those two sensors will activate the board. But problems exist on what I refer to as a spectrum, right? So in the center, you have when you push the sensor, it's going to register the push and it sends that to the controller. On one end of the spectrum, you have I push the sensor and nothing happens. On the other end is I don't push the sensor and it thinks I'm activating it. So on one end, you have the board is not going to turn on. It's not going to detect my feet, and the board will shut off prematurely. It will not engage at all. It can disengage when I'm riding, whatever, those types of examples. The other end of the spectrum is the board is going to show a false positive, and it's going to do what's called ghosting. It's going to think the rider is on because these are the only two inputs to the board. These are the only two inputs to the product. If you have a certain configuration of these engaged, the board will remain on and accelerate up until whatever its full idle speed is. For the XR, that's about 32. For the GT, that's 38. The reason this occurs, so again, notice how this is flat. Think of this sandwich, right? If it's flat, you're going to push on one point or a portion of that sensor to create that continuity. If you have a sandwich that's bent, it's a lot harder to keep all those points separated, right? It's physically more difficult to do. The GT sensor is released to have that concavity not only in this direction, but it also slightly curves up in the front. This compounds the difficulty of what would be required to keep them apart. And what we're seeing is they are showing these false positives, these end of the spectrum issues with increased frequency from what is typically observed.
Let me see. Wait, let me see the other one.
And if you want a pint one, I have a pint one back here. Oh, it's somewhere back here.
The LED headlight cable was discussed earlier in the part that I'll be uploading, Stephen Quinn. There was a...
I apologize, I lied. I do not have a pint sensor
Oh.
handy. But it's the same thing, it's just smaller.
Modix, the introduction was in the first 40 minutes that did not stream. Let's see. Have you talked about Float Life's open letter to Future Motion yet? No, we have not. Do you know about this?
I do. So Float Life put out a video yesterday addressing right to repair publicly. This is a growing topic in the Onewheel community, especially given the last couple weeks. And the general gist of it is that there needs to be more locations to provide service. It is unfeasible to have one service location to provide what is needed for the entire community, and there needs to be some system developed. And
I like your shirt. It has a
thank
lot
you.
to do with
Yeah, this is chosen specific for today.
Warranty void if removed, and you can see a giant hole has been punctured through the warranty
Yep,
void.
so
if removed
this,
sticker.
if we want to completely change topics for a second here, if you look at any of these boards, it's referring to these stickers right here. So these are put onto the rails. There's a couple measures used to detect if you've voided the warranty.
How many of those stickers here have not been removed?
Just about everyone that comes in here gets popped. It's sort of a rite of passage. Whenever I pop them, I take a video and send it to my
I
friends.
love seeing violated warranty void if
Yeah.
removed stickers, especially since they're illegal.
Absolutely, yeah. So great point you bring that up. I'm still surprised that these are even here in the first place. Not only do they have the 4 on the rails, but on each enclosure, both XR and Pint.
Somebody wants to buy the T-shirt that you have. Where do they find this?
You can find it on bobstokeshop.com. They have a couple there. They have a couple really cool shirts there.
Yeah, the
That's where I got mine.
yeah, the warranty void stickers are illegal. Yes, and companies still send them out regularly.
Yeah, so
And the fun-
there's 6 that I'm aware of that are on the XR.
Nathan Proctor at US Perg caught LG with the washing machines and dryers. Like on their live chat, when you live chat them, they say, yeah, if you have this service somewhere else, the warranty is void.
Mhm.
And he'll respond, you realize that that's illegal due to the FTC, right? And then they say, no, it's not.
Yeah,
Don't worry about it.
I'm sure conversations like that have taken place between consumers and FM. I'm not personally aware of any of them in specific, but the fact exists that they're still present. So, like I said, they put them on 4 points of the rails, the 2 that are required to get the enclosure out for the controller and the 2 that are required to get the enclosure out for the battery box. And then additionally, they will have 2 labels on each side of the battery box and the controller.
Next point on the list.
We were talking about something before this, and I already forgot what it was.
Ghosting as a result of the sensor spacing.
I think it was after that. Let me look at my notes. Or if somebody remembers.
It's a good thing one of us has notes.
Yeah, this is something I did last minute. If we want to completely change topics, we can get into some other points.
Let's go for it.
All right. So, are you familiar at all with the details surrounding the Onewheel app, stock Onewheel app?
I was speaking to a developer of a battery app, and he said you used to be able to see individual cell voltages.
Absolutely.
And
So
then you couldn't anymore, and there was something... I don't want to explain too much because I forget which sections he said I'm allowed to say and which ones I'm not allowed to say publicly, and I'm going to screw it up because I'm lightheaded.
we'll cover just the high level stuff. So older versions of the Onewheel app around the 4206 to 4208 version had cell readings available. So not only could you see the percentage of the battery, which had some firmware calculation to result in that value, you could see the overall voltage of the pack, and you could see the individual voltages of every cell within the pack. As time has gone on and aftermarket batteries have become more viable, both in an internal and an external sense, we've seen a lot of that value begin to strip away. So the first thing to go was internal cell readings. So you could no longer look at your Onewheel app for the Onewheel that you purchased to tell, oh, well, I have a bad cell popping up on, cell 13, for example, or something of the sort. You would have to take apart the board, pop all those warranty void stickers, and pull out this balance connector and plug in a reader to read each individual cell. So then all you could really go off of was battery percentage. Battery percentage has recently disappeared as well. So you can no longer see anything voltage-wise or capacity-wise other than what is calculated in the firmware for the app.
Yeah, for people who don't understand why this specific thing is important, if you have let's say you have one lithium-ion battery in your phone, it's like 3.7 or 4.2 volts, that's not going to be enough. If you need 40 or 50 or 60 volts, it's not a bigger battery, it's just a bunch of small batteries put in series to get higher voltage and then put in parallel to get more amperage so that you can power something like an electric scooter or an electric bicycle or an electric car. And the batteries are not always perfectly balanced. So, for instance, like in my EM3 EV pack with the 30Q cells, they were really great at the time because there's a reputable brand Samsung and puts out a lot of output, but they go out of balance very easily. So I could have one of the line of cells be 4.2 volts and the other be 3.6. Now it's going to stop if one of them is 3.6, it's only going to be able to run until it gets to 2.6 or 2.8 and die. It's in my best interest that every one of those cells be as close as humanly possible. So now EM3V allows you to use an app so that you can connect to the BMS and then see what the voltages of all the different cell groups. So you can figure out, I should probably open my battery and service it because I'm going to get garbage range, or I'm going to hurt the health of the battery by constantly allowing the cell to drain as much as it is. So it's good to know that so that you can actually service your product. By not allowing you to see the cell voltage readings from the BMS, it makes it more difficult to know when you should service it. So I would rather be able to tell from an app than have to actually open up this battery every single time I want to figure it out, cut it open, or just start measuring on these individual balance wires. It's a lot of extra work that you have to do, and it's a lot of opening the device that you shouldn't have to do in order to tell if your battery needs service.
Right. The problems that are inherent with this specific issue aren't really that prevalent on other PEVs because there's not any manufacturer restrictions to getting to this, what I consider general information. If we want to take a step higher here and talk about, just BMS functionality, I tend to refer to a BMS as a bartender, and I refer to the batteries as cups, right? And when you are charging your Onewheel or whatever device you have, that bartender is filling up all those cups as close as each one of them can be, right? And when those cups are out of balance, it becomes harder for the bartender to do its job. So a full battery is all those cups full, right? And there's a couple ways in which a BMS can handle that, but the bartender is also watching to see how fast that liquid, that power, is being expelled from the battery and is responsible for, getting it where it needs to go. And when you, the owner of the bar and the employer of the bartender, are unable to see how that bartender is operating, you don't know what's going on, right? And this is the product that you pay for. You have every right to know what's going on because this is how a BMS operates, the physical, discharging and recharging of cells. That's not proprietary. Anything that runs on a battery and has more than one cell is going to have something like that to keep the device safe. And when you're unable to see the behavior of what that BMS is doing, that means you are potentially at risk to not detect a problem that's there, and you're entirely dependent on the board's firmware being able to do so.
Yeah, and the issue with this is when they say that this may, there are issues with safety. I'm not saying it's unsafe to measure a battery, but if we're just talking from pure, average consumer terms, what is more safe? Looking at an app on your phone and then seeing, my battery needs service, or, I can't tell if my battery needs service. Let me open up my device and take multimeter probes to this particular battery and pray that while I'm measuring the individual pins, that I don't short the multimeter probes together.
And again, you're making an assumption that the means which are given to you to look at your battery are guaranteed to work. And that's not always the case for whatever reasons that may exist. I had a guy contact me as recently as 2 days ago. Brand new GT, plugs it into the charger, battery increases temperature up to about 200 degrees.
What?
200 degrees. I instructed him to take it outside and call the fire department because that's not supposed to do that. He contacted the manufacturer. He's still yet to hear back, by my understanding.
Yeah, over 60 Celsius, and the EM3V batteries just...
Yeah, this isn't a board that's been ridden.
Yeah.
This is a board that got taken out of the box and plugged into the charger, and that battery started reading 200 Fahrenheit.
Isn't 100 Celsius the point of, I think, thermal runaway for a lot of these, where after 100 Celsius...
It depends on the specific cell, again, to my understanding. But yeah, that's an extremely high and dangerous, or high temperature and a dangerous
You're very close to thermal runaway then.
Extremely
at which point
close.
There's no controlling it going to...
At which point, I got the guy's phone number. I called him. I said, you need to get out of the house you're in right now, or you need to find a way to get that board outside immediately.
Jeez. That's crazy.
Again, that's what you're trusting this thing to do properly.
Which it usually does.
Which it usually does. So next point.
They were talking about all the different ways that they're trying to get around that, but I got to keep my lips
Yeah,
with that.
yeah. There's a lot going on there.
That'll be in a future video.
Talked about boards arriving DOA. Talked about boards overheating. We talked about BMS controller communication being encrypted now.
Why Fahrenheit? Freedom units. We're in America.
That's just what the app was reading at the time.
Let's see.
We can talk about overseas repairs shipping. So if you're in New Zealand, Australia, Europe, anywhere, and your XR or any Model 1 wheel breaks and your choice is to send it back to the manufacturer, the shipping costs often outvalue the board you're shipping.
Even Apple has authorized repair options in other countries, which they suck. They're replacing most of everything. They're not doing repairs, but at the very least, they have an outpost in another country.
Yep.
And I'm not suggesting that a smaller company that's the startup in California or anywhere in the U.S. should have to have people everywhere or should have to have an outpost everywhere. But to only have one service center and stop other people from doing it, it sucks because again, you're not shipping back a laptop or a cell phone.
And this isn't necessarily. Yeah, the board's a lot heavier.
The motor is heavier.
The board's a lot heavier, right? If you have the BMS go bad for whatever reason, it's not possible to just send that chip in an envelope to the manufacturer, get it fixed, or purchase another BMS to drop in to fix your problem from the manufacturer. The resolution is you need to take this 30 to 35 pound board, maybe more if you have accessories on it, pack it in a box, ship it to Future Motion, wait for them to fix it, ship it back, and potentially pay those shipping fees in addition to the service fees if they're not covered under warranty.
What does a full, let's say, an XR weigh approximately?
About 30 pounds, 28 to 30 pounds.
That's going to be hell, especially if you're shipping it along with the battery. Now,
Absolutely.
What is common and customary for people? Do they remove the battery before sending it in for service if the
Nope.
issue is not the battery?
Nope. You have to send the entire board assembled in.
That makes no sense.
I would agree.
Like the battery is the part that's going to give you the most trouble in shipping. That's what's causing you to have to declare it as a hazardous material.
Right. We can get into if those materials are declared properly later. But
Thank you, John.
if you have the BMS issue, right, and you want to send the BMS just in for the manufacturer, they won't take it. As to where if you're not local to a Stoke Life service provider or a shop, you can either send it into that shop or you can drive it to me and hand me the chip. So I have people who will send me PCBs from across the country to get fixed. I don't need the whole board. That's why I have Where to Go, Test Board Guapo, right there. I'll take that BMS, I'll drop it in Guapo, I'll see if it works. If it doesn't, I'll find what's broken, I'll fix it, I'll test it, make sure it works, and I'll send it back.
I've tried to avoid board-only repairs because every time I've done them, when the person gets it back, they say it's still not working. So at some point, after 4 years of this, we just said, F it, you send the whole thing.
Yep.
But if I was dealing with a battery of this size and something that weighed 35 pounds versus a MacBook Air that weighs 2 or 3, I'd probably reconsider that.
Right, so I don't think it would be hard to agree that that's inconvenience to deal with in the States. Now let's talk about if you live in New Zealand or Australia, for example. If you want to ship that board to the manufacturer, you got to go through that whole customs process. You have to declare the battery. You have to ship it by port. Can't go by air because it's got that big battery in it.
That takes forever.
It takes forever. Cost a whole lot too.
You're going to be without your device for at least a month.
If not more. So you're now also paying close to, if not over, the value of the board you're sending in for repair just to get it there and get it back.
So if you're buying this in another country, you're really stuck with an independent service network that knows how to get around these things if they can get around.
If there's one local to you.
If it won't even exist.
Right. So if you don't have a service provider local to you in your country.
This is an opportunity for you, Paul Daniels.
Yeah.
Anybody who owns a one wheel in Australia, go to pldaniels.com and ask him. He's good.
Yeah. So if you're overseas and you need a component fixed, there are a ton of resources as well as people in the community who are happy to help you figure out what that component is to prevent you from shipping the full board. There's a ton of shops, myself personally, other shops in SLS and out of SLS, that'll help you figure out what's wrong to ship just that component so you don't have to pay those exorbitant shipping fees.
Now, when it comes to them, I've seen a couple of posts on Reddit where they said that there was a FedEx embargo and that they were not able to ship things because they weren't declaring it.
This is a relatively new occurrence that's popped up. I'm not extremely aware of it. I will only mention what I know. The boards that were shipped out to Canada, GTs from the manufacturer, and that had problems and were attempted to be shipped back by the customer, they would drop them off at FedEx locations. FedEx would call them and say that this package is unable to be delivered due to Future Motion's account with FedEx. What the specific reasons are behind it, I don't know. I have heard reports that FM has told customers to black out certain areas on the box that denote battery information. but I have not seen or experienced any of that directly myself.
That's insane. That's not safe.
No, that is not safe at all.
That's the opposite of safety. Because
Absolutely.
the reason that you write that on the box is specifically for safety reasons, so that other people know how to, where they should place this, what they should do with it, whether it should be going air, ground.
And this is the same company that says that they prioritize rider safety over you modifying your board.
I mean, like, there are companies, electric vehicle manufacturers that will put a, some sort of fireproof blanket between that and the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't know what safety precautions they may or may not be taking when you're sending a battery that's 20 or 50 amp hours, but maybe they are taking those precautions, but now they're not taking them because they don't know what the rating of that battery is because you blacked it out.
Right, and hazmat labels, and similar systems exist for a reason. Now, if you want to talk about, GT battery,
If anybody
details?
watching this, by the way, we'll get it has a screenshot of Future Motion ever asking them to black out the label on a battery. Lewis at fighttorepair.org. I'd love to see it.
absolutely,
Kids,
yeah.
GT
So,
battery.
if we're talking more about GT specifics in this conversation, every one wheel that I'm aware of has the battery watt hour information etched onto the bottom of the rail.
What is this?
Right. This is the motor harness.
No, I mean, what is this heat shrink rubbing right against here thing?
That is how the motor harness is assembled from the factory.
So this is...
I'll get you another motor if you
No,
want to
but
play with
there's
it.
no way for that heat shrink to not get scratched open. Or, like, I'm just thinking
Yeah,
of
absolutely. If you
replacement.
want to show it on camera.
Is that a tear or is that assembled that way?
Oh
Or
no, that
from
is a
rubbing?
tear from normal use.
How often does that get down to the phase wire, if ever?
It happens.
Dude. I'm feeling better about my electric bike construction now.
Yep. So
Like-
that's another thing that we can fix.
A little bit of zoom.
Yep, for sure. Let me put that there. I don't know if you can see that. I'm not in frame at all.
I'm a bad cameraman.
Right there, you can see the wires poking through that piece of shield or piece of shrink wrap.
And this probably seems petty, but as long as they're going to make it sound like the people like Josh or Mario that do hard work out of their garages are unfit to do this, I am going to be happy to point out
Yep.
everyone.
So I had
also, I forgot to plug in my
I had a local rider a few days ago contact me with an issue with his Pint, which has an overmolded version of that cable that also had wires poking through just from normal wear.
We're going to take a 40-second break because I thought I plugged my camera in before I started this.
Uh-oh. We can go for another 45 minutes without a camera if you like. You need another power outlet.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm new to this YouTube thing. For anybody watching. UPS.
This is just showing how dedicated we are to this.
UPS had a 747 crash due to a battery fire. Jeez. Please get back to Float Life open letter to Future Motion.
That's what we were talking about.
Okay, that was the thing. We
Yes,
forgot
that
in
was the
between.
thing I completely just
I spaced
forgot.
too.
Yeah. Okay, so Jeff, the owner
So,
of
what is Float Life?
Float Life is one of the largest aftermarket accessory and product companies in the one wheel space. They're not affiliated with Future Motion, but they produce more aftermarket accessories and do a ton more content production than most would do in this space. Jeff, the owner of TFL, put out a video yesterday publicly addressing one wheel and right to repair. In that, he proposed what he found to be a proper solution for how certain component problems with these boards would be fixed. And the resolution presented there was to have a network of shops similar to SLS or other organizations that do PEV repair, located about an hour's drive from each other throughout the country. And each shop has a inventory of parts, and those parts are sorted into three categories. You have entire pre-built battery modules, you have entire pre-built controller modules, and you have entire pre-built motor and tire modules. And if there's a problem, doesn't matter what the problem is inside of that box, you have people trained to identify if the problem occurs in one or multiple of those areas and just drop and replace, not repair, replace those modules.
Is that economically viable? I don't know because I don't know the industry.
It has its inefficiencies and it has its merits. It depends on what side of the argument you're on.
I imagine it's not going to be as economically viable as having somebody like you work on it, sitting over there with a soldering iron.
Yeah, so I'll tell you why I personally don't find it preferable is because we're fighting for right to repair. We're not fighting for right to replace. Right? If I have a problem go wrong with this board, there's problems that cost pennies to fix. I don't want to have to pay what I assume would be a couple $100 for a battery box BMS combination, right? If my headlight cable with that weight on it, which is somewhere on this desk, if this rips out and my $2 to $3 headlight PCB no longer works, I don't want to be on the hook for a $300 to $400 to $500 controller box when I know how easy this is to fix.
Is that necessarily a better or worse option than sending it back to Future Motion? Like, when Future Motion does a repair, are they doing it in that type of way where they're only replacing one of those three
It
things?
is my personal understanding that they are not fixing components that are broken; they are replacing them.
Is it more economically viable than sending it back to Future Motion?
To do what?
To do it the way that they're suggesting.
The only real thing I see someone saving by this proposed solution that Jeff is introducing is they're saving the shipping costs. So it's still the same FM system that we've always had. It just now occurs in more places. The same problems are going to be pertinent.
And I imagine time, because you don't have the bottleneck of one single.
Absolutely. But if we get into specifics here, so there's one more point that we didn't cover with what happens when you send your board in, right? So like we said, there's been a whole bunch of hardware and firmware revisions. And these older boards, 06s, 08s, 09s, are inherently more valuable than the newer boards because they don't contain these software locks. So let's say I own a 4209. I'm not too into one-wheeling, so I'm not really all the way familiar on what the certain firmware and hardware revisions are, but my 4209 has a problem. Say that the battery goes bad, what have you. I'm going to send it into Future Motion, right? And let's say the board's completely stock. I'm going to send it into Future Motion. They're going to fix it, and they're either going to replace the controller and the BMS that in this hypothetical situation are functional. They're going to replace them with the newer models that have those software locks. And they're either going to tell you that you now have an upgrade to your board or a refresh, or they won't tell you at all. So now you get this board back that you understand to be of higher value that has this considered to be of lower value, newer hardware. The hardware is designed to be more robust, no doubt. That is a significant improvement over the hardware design of the previous generation of XR controllers. But with that, you have now lost, to no knowledge of your own, the ability to do those aftermarket modifications that you paid for.
It's really egregious that they don't tell you that.
I would agree.
That they keep your board. I'm very curious what they do with those.
So
those get scrapped.
I have a personal story to comment on with this. So before I did any of this shop stuff, the first board I bought was a 4210, specifically a 4144 firmwared 4210. This is important in the sense of aftermarket batteries because that is the dividing line where you don't need that chip. That is the hardware revision where it flipped over to being required after that point, 4144 to 4150. And I had a problem with my board. It was in the controller. And at this point, I didn't know all the stuff I know now with how to fix stuff. So I reached out to Future Motion. The board was right on the line of being in warranty. I bought it from them directly. I asked, okay, I have this problem. I'm going to send it in to you. They offered to pay the shipping label. It was under warranty. Said, I need you to guarantee me that I get back the hardware revision that I have. Can you do that? And over multiple back and forth email conversation, they could not guarantee me that the hardware revision I was shipping them, they would be able to return back to me.
They probably have a different person doing the customer service than the person who's actually doing it, and there's no way for the person who's speaking to you to be able to guarantee that they're going to change their protocol when that comes in.
So I would imagine so. I don't know that. I don't know that for certain.
It's either that or it's willful. I tend to assume it's some sort of bureaucratic issue because if somebody wants us to do something that's specifically different from how we do things, then if it's relying on the front desk person to specifically pick that one out and walk over to the guy and tap him on the shoulder and say, hey, do this, there's a large chance
or even just attach a note to the service order. Hey, this customer wants his specific revision back. But
the issue is that my bigger issue is that should not be the standard to begin with. Like the standard should not be we are going to change your hardware revision or we're going to take away everything that you've put into your product when we're fixing something that's unrelated.
Yeah, I mean, what really irks me though is that the only two options are they don't tell you about it or they try to spin it off as an upgrade.
And that's not an upgrade.
In my personal opinion, it is not an upgrade.
Having less freedom with what you can do with the device, and also the resale value of those boards on eBay demonstrates that it's not an upgrade. Because if it was an upgrade, people would want to, because they would be worth more.
The upgrade that is pertinent to switching from this older PCB style to the newer PCB style is that it is physically more resilient. It is a more durable design.
Also, there's been at least 3 comments so far that say thank you for saying I don't know rather than making something up.
Absolutely. I try to be very truthful and honest with this. I love Onewheel more than anything else. My favorite part about it is getting more people into it and making people more aware of how the inner workings of these devices, how they actually work.
Yeah, that could be, I could understand how that would be aggravating.
I hope it's somewhat visual, that I care a lot about this. Like I said, I want Future Motion to succeed more than anybody else. I absolutely adore this product, but the company has some growing to do to be able to achieve the goals that it wants to.
All right. Now, before we go on to the next topic on there, feel free to tell me to go F myself and no. There's something that you didn't want me to put on camera. What is the problem that is being addressed by what is over there?
Yeah, so first off, let's just acknowledge that's really cool, right? It looks awesome.
And nobody else can see it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So, the GT has a 6.5-inch rim.
Yes.
Standard tire sizes are in inch increments, right? 4, 5, 6, whatever. So, every Onewheel up until this point, without exception, has used a 6-inch tire. That's a relatively standard size in the go-karting industry. So if you want a treaded tire to achieve more traction off-road or more control, go buy any treaded go-kart tire, slap it on your Onewheel, no problem. This began to be, popular enough of a modification that aftermarket manufacturers began making tires specifically for Onewheel. The stock tire for an XR, for example, a Vega MBM, has a square, slick tire designed for a go-kart. It's not made for a Onewheel. It happens to be very stable, but it is not specifically designed to be used in a one-wheeling application as aftermarket tires are, like what we looked at on Test for Guapo or the Plus. So they have a more rounded profile that allows you to roll your heel and your toe and get more control that way. The reason you get a lot of control in an XR tire, specifically a 6-inch, is because you have, let me bring up this frame here, you have a significant thickness for that edge to deform into. And when you size up the rim and you keep the outer diameter of the tire the same, the only thing that can happen is that tire is going to get thinner. That changes the characteristics of how the tire rolls and how it behaves. It also changes the amount of quote-unquote suspension you have, because the only suspension you have on a Onewheel is how much you bend your knees and how much the tire can squish. So this introduces a problem of, the rim is more susceptible to breaking because there's simply less distance for it to compress to absorb the impact seen when riding. The additional complaint from the community is that there is no 6.5-inch tire alternative. FM is the only one who makes their tires for their boards, and they're no longer purchasing them from a provider like Vega or Newly. So they have created their own custom design, which they've contracted through the manufacturer of the pint tire. And by my personal perception, it's such that they want to be the only ones who are able to switch a tire out on a GT because it uses this special rim. But keep in mind, they have paid, I would imagine, millions of dollars to develop this standard motor that they have. This is, again, used in every Model 1 wheel except for the V1. So it's extremely expensive to change this. It's cheaper to change that comparatively. So that tire is now, or that rim is now a larger diameter, which makes it more susceptible to braking, and it also holds FM to be the only one who can provide replacement tires should the OEM prove defective, pop, whatever the reason. So the solution that I believe is somewhat understandable is, okay, we'll just take that, which works for another Onewheel, and slot it over this, which is, in effect, the same stator that's present on the XR. So let's attempt to do that. We take this, we'll drop it in, and we'll notice that right off the bat, the axle is 1/2 inch wider. So it's no longer going to fit within the distance between those two rails and have the enclosures bolt up correctly, right? Same exact shape, same bolt pattern, same bolt threads, but the axle piece, which is pressed into that core of the stator, is now longer. Additionally, the port has changed, so it no longer works on the XR. It will not work on the XR, I should say. And while visually similar to the pint, it is mechanically keyed differently, so it can't work on the pint, and so the pint motor and XR motor cannot work in it. So, if we try to put this guy onto this, the problem we're going to find is that the distance from bearing seat to bearing seat, which again has stayed the same on the XR and the pint, is going to be 1.6 millimeters longer. So this plate, which bolts onto the motor, can no longer properly seat. Why is that distance 1.6 millimeters longer? There's no difference. It's the same piece. Why should this dimension have to change? This no longer works, and you can't exchange any GT parts or XR parts to get these hubs to properly interact into what's called a hub swap, a relatively common practice for enthusiast level riders who want to use the nimble control of the smaller pint motor on the frame of the XR. That's possible. So taking that similar execution, which we know to work, will not do so without modification from using the more acceptable size rim on the GT platform. That really cool big thing over there is what will make that possible. So you have to physically modify either this component, which is no longer manufactured, or this component, if it was the GT one, which is currently being manufactured, so that these two can again go back to being interchangeable. Because if you have this on it, you're now able to use all of the aftermarket tires that have been developed for the Onewheel.
And on the newer model?
No, not on the newer model. Yeah. What we're talking about is called a GTR swap or a GTXR swap. That's putting the XR hub with the XR/pint tire market available on the new Model Onewheel, the GT. And to do that, previously it was just swap and it would fit. But now there is a specific dimension change, 1.6 millimeters wider, that prevent the existing XR hubs from being used on the GT stator, on the GT platform. And there has been no statement. Again, we don't have schematics, we don't have documentation, we don't have any communication for technical information with the manufacturer to understand why that change exists.
And, there are people that will say, well, why do you think this was done? Just so that they could be the only one that can sell you a tire and anything like that?
It gives the impression that that was the intention.
Oh, listen, if we're wrong, what is the reason? Tell us the reason. Like,
I would love to know.
That I would love to know. Of Apple when it's like, well, you used to be able to buy this chip and now I can't. Well, you're wrong to assume that they just want to be able to replace a $1,500 board rather than have me do a $250 repair. Okay, if that's wrong, then what is the reason?
Right.
Like, I'm open to it. Like, let's have it. I may disagree with the reason, but if you say something,
so that alone, what we just covered, is a significant problem, right? If you look over there, there's probably 60 to 80 tires that have been pulled off. Those are all people who come to me to want to have an aftermarket tire replaced from the stock option.
I like how where it says failure is always an option.
It is always an option.
You do that a lot before you get it right.
You kind of have no choice when there's no information provided to you for how to do it safely or correctly the first time. The demand is here. Someone is going to provide this, be it the manufacturer or the third party. So jumping back into the tire conversation a little bit here. Lost my train of thought. So yeah, there's significant interest in having the existing tire market be exchanged to become compatible with the GT, right? And there's no product currently to make that possible. So what's possible is to modify your existing product or your existing wheel, which, as you might guess, would void the warranty. So you're constrained to only be using the FM tire and the FM 6.5 hub on the GT. That's one problem. But within the scope of being able to only use those profiles or that tire and that hub, there's problems specific to it. One, just off the top of my head, that we've never seen before, or again, I've never seen before, is that tire stem, right? It's a little rubber cork effectively to only, let air in and hold it there. Those will shoot out of the GTs. They don't fit properly. So that tire plug can just pop out, and now all that air pressure rushes out of the tire. It's happened at least a few times. Another problem is the tire itself is not always manufactured to what, in my opinion, is the highest of quality standards. So there are reports of tires that we've seen from users who, spin the tire and it's shaking back and forth. It's not centered. It's not aligned. There's tires that have damage or misalignment or manufacturing defect, whatever you want to call it, with the cords that the tire is constructed of, to where it no longer rolls flat or doesn't shake when you ride it. This is obviously a problem. It's a problem on a car because, it's an inconvenience. You have to hear this tire just clang around back and forth. It's a bigger problem on something like this because you're balancing on that thing that's not centered. The replacement option to fix that problem is to put a different model of that tire that has those problems on it and just hope you have it right.
And this is with the 6.5 or with the older ones?
This is with the 6.5 specifically manufactured by FM.
So
And
they become the exclusive tire manufacturer, and so
they
you can't even choose another one if you wanted to pay extra money to have a.
there are currently no 6.5 tires available for you as the owner or the non-affiliate service provider to exchange onto the GT to fix those problems. Correct.
Similar to when I talk about Apple, like I would love to hear the alternative explanation.
I would
as to
too.
why did you do this way? Because people say you shouldn't assume the worst, and maybe assuming the worst is not the right thing to do. But many people are going to assume the worst in absence of any explanation or communication at all as to why you made this decision. That drastically decreases the amount of choices available to the customer.
Yep. Again, just like what you're saying, I would love to hear the reasons behind it. We have heard nothing but radio silence from FM for issues specific to this or any of the other issues we discussed prior. There's no reasoning shared for why things happen the way that they do.
Do you have a next point?
I could probably come up with a couple.
If not, I was thinking of just having open user questions.
We can do questions and
until you
bounce
run
back
out
to
of
this,
time.
whatever you prefer.
Let's see. Reminds me of Apple in every way. Okay, we're going to start taking questions from all of you. So let's see what you have to say. For a big guy, the GT is so much better. It really makes a big difference at my size. Let's see. What is the reason that outweighs the benefit of interoperability? I think you'll have to ask Onewheel that. Future Motion that. How about just solder another cable into the motor so you get the XR motor and solder GT cable into it? It can be hard to feed through the axle, but no matching.
That's definitely a viable solution if you want to cut, splice, and do all that work to the cable as well as rework the enclosure on the GT, all while keeping it powered, because if you disconnect that power, the board will wipe itself. Or not wipe itself, rather, but corrupt its memory.
They would have probably spent millions of dollars if they actually developed the motor from scratch, but my guess is they did not. They just took a specification and adjusted it some. Not sure. Let's see, do we have any good questions? Good questions for Josh. What's the target demographic for the Onewheel? Is it a novel hobby or is it for traveling to places?
So that actually, let's pause on that for a second. Part of the reason why I love Onewheel so much is there is so much you can do with it, right? If you put a surfboard out there, there's probably a demographic in your head of who would utilize a surfboard. If you put a snowboard out there, there's probably a demographic in your head of who would utilize a snowboard. Onewheel, and I've been involved in a couple board sports. Onewheel has the widest attracting audience out of any of them I've seen, and not by a little bit, by a ton. There are people that use them to commute to work. There are people that take them to skate parks, and there are people that take them to trails. There's all sorts of different uses for this. That is the value.
Somebody on Water Street in a suit using one of those to get around.
I mean, they're utilitarian and they're for leisure.
It's a beautiful way to get around traffic in any major
Absolutely.
city.
I mean, even outside of a city, right? So I put more miles on this than I do my car every year by about tenfold.
And you can put you can bring this up to an office. Unlike I can't bring my e-bike up.
Absolutely.
To an office. It has 5 batteries.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was in college, I would take these to go to class every day, right? And that allowed me to get a cheaper apartment further from campus, and I enjoyed that commute every single day.
It's actually a nice commute. That was what Mario was saying. Is that you feel better when instead of traveling.
I look forward to a commute.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's actually fun.
Absolutely.
You get to be above ground and enjoy it.
And you never get sick of it. So, right? So the great value of Onewheel is that it is so good at whatever you want to do with it. It's a very versatile and dynamic platform. And I don't care what you want to do with it. I care that you're able to do it. And the restrictions that we're seeing to increase prevent exactly that. They prevent you from doing what you want to with the product that you own.
And somebody said, why don't you start a competing company? There's a patent until 2035.
There are many patents until 2023.
There's many patents. So even if you did want to develop a competing product, you would not legally be able to without infringing on their patents. Let's see. What about water damage? Well, I think this is in the first 41 minutes that I'm going to be uploading later because it didn't show up.
We covered a lot in those 41 minutes.
There's a lot of people that will, and Josh included, that will take liquid damage or liquid resistant boards and turn them into liquid proof boards.
Correct.
And there's an entire process that you go through.
There's an entire process manufactured or created by a certain aftermarket company who is extremely proficient at doing so. And that has turned into more or less of an unofficial standard of, you don't talk about waterproofing a board, you talk about badgering a board.
What is badgering?
Badger Wheel is a company that invented what's called the Badger Kit. It is all the parts, materials, what have you, that you need to waterproof your Onewheel. It's not full manufactured, components that you're dropping on in most cases. It's the means which you need to implement to seal your board up, to make it more resistant to the elements that FM says that they're either not willing to honor the warranty with, or ones that they'll even advertise at times taking the boards through.
Do you think the 6.5-inch rim is better heat sinking?
From a physical standpoint, it would seem like it would. It's a larger heatsink. It's a physically more massive component. However, from what we have seen with riders using the device, it overheats more frequently than the XR. That can be attributed to a multitude of factors, the biggest of which that the GT just produces more power. It's a more powerful board.
It's gonna take some time, I imagine, before that you figure it out if that's the case.
Yeah. So the nice thing about Onewheel, the thing I really like about it, is the downfalls in certain design aspects or problems that weren't maybe considered by the manufacturer turn into opportunities for the third party. So Onewheel, I strongly believe, would not be where it is today without the third party. That is the true value of the community surrounding this product. And with that, you produce a ton of components that allow you to modify both the performance and the aesthetic of the device to your choosing. Again, accommodating to what we were saying earlier, how you can do whatever specific style of riding you want to do with this board. You get to choose how you build this out. I call it the Jeep Wrangler of e-boards because you can build it out to do, again, what you want with it.
Let's see. How does it look right now for a new user to get to the upgrades you were just talking about?
Step one is to buy a board used.
And what specific revisions should they be getting if they wanted to be able to do all of these?
So again, a lot of people come to me asking for, well, what's the best tire? What's the best foot pad? What's the best battery? Best is relative. Best is entirely dependent on what you want to do with it. This is why I take a very strong responsibility to not only do the services that I offer to the best of my ability, but make the user aware of what's being done and why it's being done, right? So I can have somebody come to me asking, I want this battery because I heard it was the best. And I'll have somebody else come to me and I want to go as far as I possibly can. Those both need to sort of be mended into the same type of a conversation of here's the things that I think are going to best suit your interest and here's the reasons behind them. And that's not something that's really seen from a manufacturer level, right? You can read through the sales points of what's offered on their site, but nothing's custom tailored to you. That's one of the things that I really strive to hit with the people that come into my shop. I've already forgot the question you asked that I was trying to answer.
Oh, well, it was if somebody wants to be able to do a lot of the modifications you were talking about.
Yes.
We were going over specific models where there was certain functionality taken away at certain hardware and also firmware revisions. So if somebody wants to be able to not worry about, I can't do this, this is serialized to that, which models are best to go for?
Again, best is dependent on what you want to do with it. That's king. That's number one point there. If you are interested in reading direct information from your board, as well as modifying the power input, so changing the battery, you're going to want something pre-4210, 4144. That's any version 4106, any version, or 4206, any version 4208, any version 4209. There's a ton of argument in between there, and the early 4210, so 4210, 4144. There's a ton of argument in between there of what board in that space of four is the best, but again, that's all relative. So those four models are known to not have the software locks present on the later models. That allows you to drop in aftermarket products. But additionally, if you find yourself in a situation where there is damage to the BMS or the controller that's irreparable, you can drop in a replacement. And it'll work, it'll sync up, it'll operate as it should. Any product sold after that 4210, 4144 point requires additional components for you to buy and have service to get the same level of service provided in the earlier generations. So if you're seeking a board specifically to modify it and turn it into what you want it to be, pre-4210, 4144 is what you want to shoot for.
That's a no. Do the rims even have alignment pads?
Alignment pads. The rims are a typical seat. So I don't know if you want to show that on camera. It's just like any other go-kart tire. You sort of get the profile of it there.
I'll zoom.
Whoop, we'll go right there. So it's just your typical seats that you would have on any standard go-kart tire, any car tire. There's no alignment, anything. You have a notch right here that's used to pop the beads over to get the tires on and off, but that's about it. If you really want to get into alignment, there's a tire stem that's at some angle, and then there's a hub plate with 7 screws that gets bolted onto the outside that is somewhere on this desk. But yeah, nothing special as far as the tire is concerned mounting to the hub.
All right. Let's see. Future Motion did an advertisement with Charge and Ride, and now it's banned.
Yeah, so Charge and Ride has an interesting story. That's what we were talking about earlier, plugging the charger into the board. Have you heard of what's called RFTR, Race for the Rail?
No.
So this is the FM sanctioned competition league that occurs yearly, and it's gotten wildly more popular throughout the years, but I forget off the top of my head which specific year this is, but there was a year where a ton of plus riders who are very passionate about this board sport and want to modify their boards accordingly discovered that you can, take an external battery, plug into the charger, and take it out, ride it, extend the range. And at this Race for the Rail FM sanctioned event, obviously a lot of people high up in the FM corporate structure are there. They observe these changes. They go, oh, that's very interesting. Not too far after, I believe it was 3206 to 3208, another hardware revision, was introduced that specifically prevented only that CNR feature. Didn't add anything else to the board. All it did was prevent that from being possible.
Ooh, that's ridiculous.
And we've seen that pattern pop up with increasing frequency. So there's, now restrictions to VNR. There's battery capacity measuring. There's all sorts of measures pertinent to trying to strip the user, from my understanding, of battery information that's pertinent.
What are your thoughts on the JW trip on 4212? Is it the best of both worlds, best hardware with all the mods capable? Yeah,
so the 4212 is a necessity if you are trying to change the battery on either your Pint or your XR past 4210, 4150. The performance that you're going to see between an older and a newer board is really negligible. There's not a whole lot that goes on. All you need is that chip to enable that functionality. It's going to work just the same. I highly recommend it as a modification. I do it to my personal boards. It is one of the more expensive things that you can do, but again, you're able to do stuff. You're able to modify the product that you own in a way that you find desirable to achieve something the manufacturer is restricting otherwise.
Is salt a big problem for one wheels in New England?
Absolutely.
Salt is a big problem for my e-bike in New York.
Yes, so that's another great reason for why you would badger, right? So badgering not only prevents water from getting in there, prevents salt, debris, any foreign matter on the outside of the board that you don't want in there to mess with your battery, your controller, or your BMS. Badgering is what is designed to handle that.
Salt destroys everything.
Salt destroys everything, correct.
I learned which...
Yep, so remember how we talked about these cheaper bearings, right? So you have the NSKs on the 4208s and newer, and you have the CNUs on the 4208s, or sorry, 4208s and older NSKs, 4208s and newer have CNUs. These fail significantly sooner. Salt is one of the things known to kill them.
Yeah, in the BBS HD, the bearings will get destroyed by salt very easily. I'm very curious how the bearings stand up compared to the comparison you did on those two. But yeah, one you shake and you hear, one you shake and you don't.
Yeah, so that's just, you're hearing the lack of grease that used to be in that bearing. It's the seals are not as high quality, so it's easier for that grease to escape the bearing, which is going to provide room for
every winter I destroy a BBS HD with salt.
So there's significantly higher quality aftermarket bearings that are available and provide additional performance above what the stock will give you. Right? There's bearings that you can put in that'll add an extra, it depends on the rider, but an extra 1 to 3 miles of range just because the rolling resistance is that significantly decreased.
I kind of want to open my motor when I get home now. Let's see. And earlier you said patents are preventing competing products until 2023 or 2035. I think 2035. 2035. So the problem will be solved. 7 of my batteries have exploded all intentionally, says Mario Contino. I blew them up in different ways with the specific purpose of learning their safety limits, their avenues of failure, and how not to let them fail. All hail the garage. All hail the garage indeed, sir. Josh, what was your first modification?
Oh, God. Putting flight fins on, easy. I wouldn't call that modification. That's add an accessory. But that is a absolute godsend of a product, in my opinion.
Somebody says, talk about what Future Motion did to a competitor at CES.
Ooh, this is fun. Okay.
I've never seen this before. So what am I looking at here?
Within the world of self-balancing electric skateboards, there's effectively 3 players. You have FM, which has the extreme majority of the market share. You have an aftermarket product called the Trotter. And then you have whatever somebody wants to build in their garage from complete scratch.
Okay.
No starting controller, no starting BMS, no starting motor, no starting tire, anything, completely scratch. We're going to talk about just the first 2, right? I forget what specific year at CES it occurred, but One Wheel had purchased a booth to market their product at this event. And Trotter, a Chinese manufacturer, as you can see, manufacturing a device with a similar form factor, also elected to be at that event. I don't know the specific details of how it happened, but there was an involvement or a conflict between the two of them to where FM was able to get Trotter removed from CES. So they were packed up and they were evicted from the event, by my understanding.
They really don't seem to like competition,
Not at all.
in my opinion. It says, the raid surprised booth representatives and CES goers alike. U.S. Marshals confiscated the booth's pamphlets, signs, electric skateboard, and other devices. The reason, according to reports that surfaced, was that Future Motion believed that Changzhou had violated its intellectual property. Future Motion reportedly learned about the competing Trotter device via one of its customers. Wow, how fucking salty do you have to be?
So that device, the Trotter, is still manufactured and available for sale in the U.S.
Hopefully people, oh my God. Are there Future Motion zealots that believe artificial limitations benefit the consumers? Because that with Apple, typically anytime I say, here's a design flaw, here's a problem, here's this, here's that, they'll say, you're making this up.
Right. So a lot of this discourse takes place in multiple groups on Facebook surrounding Onewheel. And those groups are very hot right now conversationally. So there are, disagreements, there are misunderstandings, there are conversations occurring as to not only why these things are occurring, but who is of benefit. And there are people from, again, what I've seen, what I've been able to read, who stand on FM's side with this. From my personal experience, looking through the comments I've seen, I do not interpret those people defending FM's moves to be in the extremely experienced category and may not fully be aware of all the details that we've even covered in this conversation.
So one of the things that I've noticed with the products that I work on in particular is like the things that I wind up talking about. I talk about it because after I've had the 40,000th customer come through my door and say the exact same thing. Like, I went there, they told me this isn't covered under warranty and here's why, and then I'll show them, this is how the device was made and whatever. That it just becomes aggravating to me to see the way that they treat their own customers. So they'll say, but what happens is there are people that buy products now, I don't know if this is a change or if I just noticed it now. People seem to associate their identity with the people they vote for and the brands they buy. So it's not, I bought this product, I bought this that DPA mic because it just happened to be the best thing at the time. It's, I love DPA. If you insult DPA, I feel like you've insulted me and my identity personally, and I'm going to respond to you in that way. And like a lot of people will, like if I say, here is a design flaw with this product and here's how you fix it, they'll say, you're making this up, you're doing that to it, they'll attack me as if I'm attacking them as a human being when I'm saying this is a product that has a flaw that I think it shouldn't have.
So that level of passion absolutely exists within the Onewheel space. If we're going to point out majorities and minorities, I would not put the majority of the consumer base of FM's products in support of the manufacturer.
And I think that the difference here is that you have to be, I'm not saying this is an insult because I love
no, and I don't interpret any of it as such.
You're probably a more eccentric person that's open to more alternative points of view if you're willing to ride something with one wheel at 20
I would
miles
hope
an hour
so.
down the road. And
I
you're
would hope
probably
so.
more open to to breaking rules, to not listening to a manufacturer that says you're the only one that should be allowed to fix this. Whereas let's say somebody who buys an Apple product, they're buying it solely because it's a normal, typical computer or phone and it's easy to use and everything. So when I explain some of this stuff, they'll no, I just want to go to the manufacturer. I trust them. And I just feel like this community is a community of people that on average are going to be a little bit more critical of the company and a little bit more open to not identifying with the brand, even if they love the product.
Absolutely.
Because even this laptop that I'm using, this is a Lenovo ThinkPad, and I love ThinkPads. I love them since IBM owned it. But, like when they did the Superfish spyware thing, that was really dumb, and they deserve to get blasted. Or like when they removed trackpad buttons and just integrated it into the trackpad. That sucked. They deserve to get blasted for it. And I like it, but when people would point out that was bad, I wouldn't feel like they were insulting me personally.
Right.
But a lot of people feel like if you say something about a company that you're insulting the person who bought it for their decision, which is not the case at all.
Agreed.
There are people that do that. They say, you bought this, you're an idiot because you like this particular brand or company. And I try to avoid engaging that entirely.
Yeah, so Onewheel is a very cohesive community, right? We're all very passionate about these devices. We're all excited to meet up with one another. There's multiple events throughout the year that we all sort of group up at. But Onewheeling really, and I don't say this just to be, to like sound typical, but like Onewheeling is a family. It really, truthfully is. There's people we look forward to seeing every single year. There's places we look forward to going every single year. And that conflict I don't believe is as pertinent from user to user. In the Onewheel space, it definitely feels unified that we're all one voice asking for one thing, and that's control over the products we own.
That is really cool. I have not met with one person who's an asshole who uses this thing so far, for whatever that is. I knew a guy that took his Mocha and MacBook Pro everywhere just so he could let others know. Oh, geez. I own the XW, wanted the GT with the recent nonsense of taking my money. Let's get a question. Can you fix a pint with the nut cam off the main board?
What was that?
Can you fix a pint with the nut that came off the main board? I think that's the thing we showed earlier with the nut shows off with the Bluetooth chip.
There's varying levels of damage there. If the nut is just off, yes, absolutely fixable. If there is light scratching damage to the PCB, yes, that's fixable. If there's certain components that are damaged by that impact, yes, it's fixable. If it starts to etch into the PCB significantly enough to where it's not fixable, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to lose Bluetooth functionality permanently on the board, or you're going to lose board functionality altogether. Because these Bluetooth chips are serialized into the controller. I can't buy another Bluetooth chip off the shelf and drop it in and have it work.
So how often is it the chip that's dead versus you have to run jumpers on the board for the traces that were scraped away? And is that even a thing? Are you able to run jumpers on the board for the traces that are scraped away, or does it wind up going 2 or 3 or 5 layers
it's possible. There are certain traces that are capable of being jumped and traced out. There are certain traces where it's extreme effort and still possible, and there are certain traces that are not.
Yeah, David and Paul wind up the part of their job with the iPhone and is having to dig 2 or 4 layers down to find the trace and then run these little wires that are thinner
so
than a hair.
in that regard, it's actually somewhat preferable because all the contacts aboard, all the contacts that we need to get to are relatively accessible through VIA's other measures similar. But as far as etching into the board to access an inaccessible trace, that really isn't a significant problem. Are there cases where it can occur? Potentially.
Thank God. That's no fun.
Not at all.
I remember when I was working with Mark and he had to do that on the phone. He was using an articulating microscope rather than a boom stand one. Mm-hmm. And I'm walking and he goes, "Stop moving."
Whole thing's shaking.
Yeah, and then I'm doing this and then I went to drink my water. This is 7 years ago. We were teaching together. I go to drink my water and he yells, "Stop moving." I'm like, "Are you serious?" Because the microscope is shaking.
Same thing. I got my scope right there. If the unit who lives below me in this building is walking across the living room, I have to stop what I'm doing.
Oh, and you have a desk mount. So I have no I have a boom stand. I don't mind having to carry it around. And I stay in one spot because I can't stand the shaking. It drives me nuts. Let's see. What do we? Some good questions. Let's see what we have here. We're almost out of time.
Come on, Ashton. I know you want to ask some questions.
Is he here?
Yeah, so Ashton's he's the owner of Atlo Shop in Atlanta. He is the guy you responded to the initial comment for in your first video.
Oh, cool. Oh, I could see Max here too.
That dude is the Onewheel wizard for anybody who's unaware.
He's the one that I called about this before I did the first video. I had a couple of questions for him. He actually picked up at a really odd time from New Zealand, so I really appreciated that.
Oh, no, different guy.
Okay. I think I'm thinking of a different country then. There's somebody that I called that has a foreign country code. I don't know if that was Max or somebody else. What is Josh's Instagram?
At Permawheelie, PERMAWHEELIE.
Let me make sure I edit this into the description. So I have your Facebook there, but I'm going to add this.
Thank you for lighting a fire under my ass to actually post some things on it now.
Okay, so Instagram.com/PermaWheelie. Go, find stuff. And what do you have next?
I see my phone's blowing up.
Is there a chance there'll be open source code for Onewheel?
I would hope so. I find it extremely unlikely. FM is a software company first and foremost. They're going to protect that IP with whatever means they can.
Talk about what Future Motion did to Trotter Wheel at CES. We went over that.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't somebody start making 6.5-inch tires? I think it's because there's only one product, whereas the other, if you have a tire that's meant for a go-kart, it works in a bunch of different things. There's a larger market for it.
Yeah, whoever commented that has access to the molds required to make a 6.5-inch tire, please call me.
There's probably a lot of people.
It is extremely expensive to do so.
What are the options for front concave? I saw a really old video where you have to rip out the sensor out of a V1. Is that still the only possibility?
Yeah, so again, it depends on what board you want to do this to. Every board up until the GT has a flat sensor. Again, the sensor we called it a sandwich. That sandwich is adhered to the top of a slab of wood, and that sandwich is able to detect left and right pressure. And to bend that sandwich is what's going to create that concave foot pad. There's a couple solutions for it. Anything DIY is going to be extremely dependent on what the user does, right? To the point where it's not reliable. So there are two solutions that are, in my mind, preferable from a durability standpoint. One is what's called a flight deck, manufactured by Flight Fins. This is a sticker. Actually, hold on, I have one.
He's excited. I like seeing people excited about what they do. This dude's the real deal. This guy is the real deal.
I apologize for the brief intermission. So this is a flight deck. It is, in essence, a foam sticker.
What does this do?
So this adheres over the top of your front sensor and gives you that front concave, most importantly, without bending the sensor.
What are the
sensor
benefits of
doesn't
front
move.
concave?
It gives you more control. So remember what we said, a concave foot pad gives you more leverage to turn the board toe side as well as heel side. So this is option one. This sticks over the front of the sensor. It's a sticker. Option two is what's called fish bones. These are 3D printed adhesive strips that sit on either side of the board, again, to raise your toe and heel up and give you that concave shape for that increased control.
Let's see. I went over to this section. Mm-hmm. You should... No, screw that. You should let Lewis ride a Onewheel on stream so he has the experience. Hell no, I don't want to die.
If you're willing to try it, I'm willing to teach you.
For the I'm not going to do my first one on stream. No, I'll get my concussion off camera.
I can't think of a better platform.
Let's see. Hell no, they will not make EV. What do you think of the new OE chip? O-W-E.
The new OE chip. Okay, so
OE?
OE. It is an open source implementation to a previously closed source problem.
Fishbones.
So, do you remember this? This is the JW FFM chip.
Yeah.
This is manufactured by JW Batteries. This is what FM is suing JW over, is the implementation of this chip. OE is the open source alternative to this guy here. So instead of paying what used to be $250, now discounted, I believe they're somewhere around $50 a chip, you can buy, I think it's less than 10 or $20 worth of PCB components and download some open source firmware that does the same behavior that does.
Poor JW.
Yep. So again, it provides another option for the aftermarket community to
Victory
consider.
Board Shop and SLS says hi again. Tell
What's
Josh
going on,
to say
Vic?
BMS 10 times fast. Thank you, Victor.
That'll be BMS.
I'm saying PMS.
Yeah, don't say that.
I can't say that on stream. But I think I started saying PMS after the fifth time. You need to ride a Onewheel for a few days. I promise you will never stop. Oh, I have enough stuff in my office to blow myself up with already with 2 wheels.
Yeah. So what's one more?
What is fish bones?
So fish bones is what we just talked about. That's the adhesive component that can sit over the front sensor without modifying it to give you a concave front foot pad.
I know nothing about Onewheels, but why can't the community develop open source hardware and software?
Because patents prevent you from doing so.
Because patents prevent you from doing so. There you have it. Yeah. Echo. Mike is echoing. No, I think that was us repeating ourselves.
It was us saying BMS.
Yeah, BMS. Let's see. How can Future Motion expect to do all repairs with just 5 employees? They probably have more than 5
They have a
employees.
little bit more than 5 employees.
Ashton is amazing, says JW Batteries.
I would tend to agree.
Lewis, why don't you have a MacBook? Go away. I like my ThinkPad. If I had a MacBook, I probably would have not started the stream 41 minutes late and had uploaded it later.
You would have needed your adapter too.
Future Motion sucks at allowing owners to secure their boards too. What do you mean by secure? Is this from Jonathan Red?
I'm not sure what that's specifically addressing.
My BMS died in my V1. I sent it to Future Motion to fix it. It was out of warranty. They told me it needed to be replaced. I asked how it broke. Was it something I did? I've never had a BMS die in any one of my batteries. I've had cells start to go bad. I've destroyed controllers. I've destroyed motors. I've destroyed every single piece of my motor, but I've never had a BMS die ever. What causes BMS failures?
So there's a couple things. Broken wires can be, I guess it's not damage to the BMS, but broken wires can obviously cause the BMS to not work properly. The biggest thing that I've seen is water damage.
Okay.
Right. So these are not waterproof products. They're water resistant with a nitrile rubber seal. That seal from what I have seen working on boards, is not always assembled properly and sealed completely. This can allow varying levels of waterproofability to the board, or water resistibility to the board, to where you can have two identically built boards next to each other. One is just going to naturally be better at resisting water damage than the other, purely because of how it was assembled by the person who built it.
Interesting. Okay, so a lot of it is water. Yeah, because I've never had a BMS die.
Yeah, water damage as well as ghosting. So if your board ghosts, the heavier of the two sides is going to be the battery. It will accelerate in that direction. When it hits something, the first thing to receive that damage is the BMS.
Did someone already hack the Onewheel GT to bypass the firmware error? If not, do you think we will ever have this?
To my knowledge, that has not been done.
I think eventually somebody's going to probably do that. Because, I mean, there's a lot of people that really care about this product. It's very popular.
Absolutely.
And there's a team of dedicated people that just like to do things that they're not supposed to do. You tell them you're not allowed to do this, and that's it. We want to see Lewis ride. Yeah, about that. Yeah, no. I already got my concussion in 2018. Thank you very much. Let's see. Where can I get a shirt like yours, Josh?
I think I got this one from bobstokeshock.com. He has a whole bunch of cool shirts from there. Highly recommend.
Does Josh have a YouTube channel that I could subscribe to?
I do not, unfortunately. At least not at this point.
Does Josh use a MacBook?
I do not. Used to.
How popular are Onewheels in New England since they can't be used all year?
The group I ride with in Boston, I believe, just crossed over 2,000 members. There's a couple groups in New England totaling a couple hundred. In New England alone, there's roughly 13 to 15,000.
How horrible is this in moderate snow?
Depends on how you build it. If you build it to ride in snow, there's actually products designed specifically to ride in snow.
I've rode my bike in snow. It's just you have to be considerably more alert. And
absolutely, yeah. So it requires a different level of awareness. There's an analog product to effectively tire chains that you can put over the tire specifically for riding on snow and ice.
I thought that riding on snow would be way more difficult than it actually was once I got in a car, because I had 3 years of experience, because I just got my driver's license a year ago. I had 3 years of experience on an electric bike where it's like I'm going 40 miles an hour down the road and I go over the tiniest little piece of ice or something, and you have to correct yourself immediately so you don't fall on your ass. And it's like
ditto for this. Where
four wheels is like easy mode at that point.
Yeah, ditto for this, but now you're balancing on a single point, going over snow and ice.
Yeah, I don't have the balls for that yet. Someday. Talk about Vesk.
Oh, okay. Hold on. I have a fun little box right here.
What is Vesk? The open source community is doing that. Check out Vesk. What is Vesk?
Vesk is this box.
I have a long-lived disdain and hatred for acronyms on this channel.
So Vesk stands for Variable Electronic Speed Controller. Again, the board has a battery, a BMS, and a controller. The BMS handles how power is put into and pulled from the pack. The controller handles how the board behaves, how that wheel spins to keep you on top of it. There are restrictions implemented that we've talked about for over an hour now over why that controller can just strip functionality. The aftermarket community, or the third-party community, has come up with a potential alternative to the one-wheel controller called the Vesk. That is it. So that is a open source version of the controller that operates a single-wheel balanced device.
I love the big solder blob.
Yeah, so you'll notice between...
Oh, those are some beefy transistors.
You'll notice between the XR controller and the Vesk, where's the camera here?
Those transistors are way bigger than those.
Yeah, so
right? Those look like the ones that are inside of, let's say, a Sabvaton e-bike controller or something.
Right, so the components are spec'd to be significantly in excess of what's expected on this form factor to prevent the problems that we as a community have seen and continue to see.
Look at those transistors on the Vesk. That's insane. Because the transistors that you were showing on the stock one, those look like that looks like the charge port transistor on a MacBook. It really does. That looks like it's made for like 18 volts.
It is a much smaller form factor.
No, it looks like 18 volts, 4 amp-ish. But the green board actually looks like an e-bike controller.
Yep. So remember, we said that FM is first and foremost a software company.
Yes.
Their motor control, firmware, algorithms, what have you, is far superior to anything. And the goal of Vesk is to replicate that behavior. This cannot do what that does to the quality that does at this point in time. There is a large and growing aftermarket or third-party community of contributors to develop this to be similar to that.
I hope they win.
Because at this point, at the point where this is able to match the behavior of that, you're no longer constrained to buy a $500 to $700 controller that is no longer being manufactured and only accessible through the used third-party market. you're able to buy something from the factory at a significant cost savings that does the same, if not more, without the restrictions of
What
that
boards
component.
does that go into?
This currently is not designed for any specific model. The true value of VESC is if you want to spin an electric motor, you get one of these and you program it yourself to do so.
Okay.
So all the hardware is fully accessible. All the software, all the firmware, fully accessible.
You just have to find a way to get it to fit into your device.
So there's two problems with that. Two problems with the VESC. You have to find a way to adapt it to fit it into the XR or the Pint or whatever one wheel you want to put it in, and you have to find how to configure the software either on your own or from the community standpoint of what's been developed so far.
Before the Phase Runner became popular from Grin and ebikes.ca, I remember trying to get a BAC 800 from Accelerated ASI, and you'd have like 36 different wires, and you'd have to figure out which one goes to which on your screen, your controller, and everything.
Yep.
And program
Notice I
it.
have
Like
a battery connector. I have the 3-phase wires. I have whatever header I need to plug in the phase feedback from the motor.
Yeah.
I have the foot pad and a USB-C.
I remember just sitting there for 5 hours just trying to figure out how to map each
So
thing.
the true value in this for the enthusiast who cares so much as to attempt producing a better riding experience than what the manufacturer is offering, this is what this is suited for.
And somebody will probably eventually come up with a way to adapt that to any one particular one wheel and come up with a way to, I don't know, like
so
screw mounting holes
this
and connectors and everything, and then just wind up rebranding and selling.
Right.
it.
VESC is a general term. There's VESCs on e-boards. There's VESCs in your e-bike.
Yeah.
They're similar to this, but this specific model is configured for a single-wheeled balance device.
Very cool. There was a huge breakthrough on VESC today, Josh. It is now like a one wheel, says JW Batteries.
Yeah, so the VESC motor control development in recent history has gotten extremely good.
Let me see what JW Batteries just sent. Oops, something went wrong. Oh, wait, where is this?
Still streaming, right?
He gave me a link, but for some reason YouTube is destroying the link. Ah, that's because it's adding studio to it. Are you serious?
I think I know which video this
Oh,
is.
okay. Let's see. Come on. Where are we? Let's. Ta-da. What is this?
Oh, no, this is a different video. So this is an update on the new parameterization and functionality within the VESC software library.
Let me see if I can get this on screen. Here we go.
Hey guys, it's me again.
Oh, yeah, this was posted today.
Yep.
VESC balance firmware, magic settings.
I know I've been pumping out a lot of
Well,
videos.
that's 20 minutes, so I'm not going to play the whole thing now, but anybody who wants to see it, thank you very much. JW Batteries is too generous. Don't give money to Future Motion, buy a VESC and join the community. I think, again, a lot of people that buy this, there's still going to be a lot of work that you need to do to figure out how to adapt this to fit inside your casing. You're going to have to deal with making your own connectors and wiring harnesses, programming it. There's definitely money to be made there from somebody who's willing to take that and then just sell it as a kit that's just directly compatible. Like you open your step 1, open one wheel, step 2, screw this in, step 3, have fun.
Yeah, you put a significant target on your back in doing that.
You need somebody to do that. Like the ASI BAC 855 had a lot of potential and it was awesome. But I think what Grin did with the Phase Runner is they sell it with the wiring harness already. They sell it with the wiring harness to plug it into your motor. It already comes pre-programmed to work, so you don't have to program it. Granted, they use I think like 300 integral gain, which is insane. But
yeah, so anybody
doing wheelies,
anybody
that's cool.
who attempts to
They're
produce a one-wheeled self-balanced skateboard form factor device puts a target on their back, right?
Also.
For FM litigation, for patent infringement and copyright violation.
But how are you infringing on? I guess you are infringing.
That's not an
on
argument I'm willing to make on FM's behalf. I can understand components of their perspective.
That would be a good question for Leonard French, who did a video on
I would
the
agree.
JW lawsuit.
Yep.
I want to have him on and talk about that.
This would be a ton of fun. Yeah, but
yeah, like there would, because I would not be willing on another bike to go through what I did with the BAC 800 test kit and programming everything from scratch. Because figuring out the PID loop from scratch, that sucks.
yeah. So there was one company, the entity. I don't know if they were a full company at this point, but they're called like DIY Wheel, something similar. And they attempted to produce a VESC kit where you could make your own one wheel. And they had a functional prototype. They had a proof of concept that showed that it was viable to get a self-balancing skateboard using that style of a controller with their own manufactured components. And when pre-orders began to get collected on this, there was, I think it was a CND sent to DIY Wheel specifically to stop producing a component that infringed on their patents. All of that, those pre-orders had to be refunded.
That patent is really screwing up a lot of a chance for competition innovation.
More than one. So there is a patent over, if we want to talk about details of patents right now, the XR has a device patent over the entirety of the assembled device. The Pint has patents not only over the entire device, but the components that it is assembled into. So like the bumpers, for instance, would have their own patent. The controller would have its own patent. So if you want to make an aftermarket accessory for the XR versus the Pint, in certain situations, you're able to do so on the XR because the XR is patented, not the parts you're replacing. The Pint is not the same case because now you're replacing that patented component with another device that's designed to do the same thing.
Yeah. So there's because I know that Bafang is not going to give two craps as a Chinese motor company if somebody comes up with some sort of controller that plugs into the system. But an American company that's providing an entire solution like that is there's definitely a lot more risk there.
Yeah, I mean, but there is a lot more risk. There's no question about that. I like to draw a lot of analogies here from the automotive industry. If I go out and I buy a Mustang, there's nothing Ford can or would do to stop me from pulling the motor out of it and putting a bigger motor in.
Floatwheel.com was one of them. I believe they were based in China.
That's what it was. Thank you. It wasn't DIY Wheel. It's Floatwheel.
Future Motion went after them and they refunded everyone and had them use Bitcoin. Wow.
Correct.
That's crazy. Look into the Smilio Motors lawsuit. We are almost out of time. We're a few minutes away from the end. I have to stop wasting his time. It comes 6.
I'm open to keep talking about this as long as you want.
Or we'll keep going. Let's do it. Future Motion pissed off their community so badly they will put themselves out of business. It will chap their asses so much when they are watching videos of people ride home-built one-wheels. I think home-built one-wheels would be a bit away, but it would be cool to see how far they're able to get in matching the firmware.
Yeah, and to be clear, every component on the one wheel can be replaced except for the software and the chips that the software runs on.
Who'd have thought reinventing the wheel would go so wrong? Okay, nice pun. I get it. Ha. Let's see.
No, but there's aftermarket components currently that exist for everything excepting the hub of the motor, the rotor of the motor, the front enclosure, and the rear enclosure, and the PCBs. Just about everything else can be replaced with an aftermarket option that promotes more features over the OEM.
Float wheel shut down. I have a kit I got assembled, but I'm having problems with the rail and I can't get a replacement since they fully shut down. That sucks. Where do you get a motor if not from Future Motion?
Third party. It's the only place you can get them.
Where does a third party get it from? Or is this part of
this is used boards that people have that don't work, wheels that break down. People part out wheels to sell the components.
That's a pain in the ass.
That is the exclusive way that you can get a motor if you don't have one yourself.
Yeah, like we just buy donor boards from China for random board. And we used to be able to get donor boards for a lot of MacBooks from like $11 to $14. Now they've gone up in price for the newer ones where they're rare to like $100 or $200 or $300 for a donor.
Yeah, so the same thing exists here. That's the reason why, again, something that is hiding on this desk or over there, this controller, is completely dead. It has fried the power rail for the LED and the MCU. That's another topic we can talk about. But the MCU is fried. There's no way to upload firmware to it. Not that we have that way to do it, but this will never operate again. So the only function that this has is a donor board for other controllers that may blow. The good components may still be here and extracted.
Damn.
So yeah, let's talk about that for a second.
Let's go for it.
The power rail for the XR. So the headlight needs to get power from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
The MCU, that guy, needs to get power from somewhere as well. Just so happens that the two are electrically connected together, and under certain circumstances where there is significant load on the motor, be it what's called like a nudge, which is where you would pop up an obstacle, or if you're at extremely high speed and you go to brake and you're now regenerating a significant amount of power. Both scenarios have a high drive current occurring on the controller. It can be so high that it can exceed the driver chip that's used to regulate that power, and it will blow through that component. And because, again, the power rail is shared between the light and the MCU, it will short to the MCU and fry the chip. And the controller is effectively dead.
That's genius design right there.
So you'll find, if you watch like the trick videos that are present online, like from Footlife or someone similar, a decent amount of the professional tier, very experienced riders will ride with their headlights off because it makes that problem less likely to occur.
Do they have aftermarket headlights or what, like something on their head? Or
You
vest?
can, I mean, the easiest solution is to turn your lights off and wear a flashlight or have one in your hand. There are aftermarket accessories to aesthetically change the color or the flashing of the headlights and taillights.
This is kind of like very similar to FlexGate in a MacBook, where like the light will die on the screen.
But yeah, there's
This
no
is a MacBook.
product or solution to address the problem of the shared power rail between the headlights and the MCU.
Back in 2016, Future Motion had U.S. Marshals raid Trotter One-Wheel booth at CES. They dropped the lawsuit later. I don't think their patents were strong enough. I think the concept of whether or not these patents would be considered valid or invalidating the patent would be a very interesting rabbit hole to go down. Right to repair, says Bob Nicholson. Thank you. I feel like anything related to transportation has no reason and no grounds to not be user serviceable. I agree. Let's see. I have that same shirt. Yeah.
It's a great shirt. Love it.
I like his shirt. It's very iPad Rehab has Jessa Jones has a shirt that says I void warranties or we void warranties here, and she's got like a picture of herself on it.
I mean, yeah, we got stickers of this too that you can put everywhere. They're a ton of fun.
I have some inside info on that case I will share with Lewis from JW Batteries. I look forward to getting it in my inbox.
Sounds like you're going to Texas.
That would be a fun road trip. Lewis, you have to ride one next time. Is there anything you think has not been gone over or not been covered that should
We can go back to the notes. Let's see what we got. Ooh, FM dealers. Let's talk about that. So, Onewheel obviously has one location, Santa Cruz, California. That is where everything is assembled to make the final product. The components are all made overseas in China and imported for assembly and testing in the US, but then they are distributed from that one central location. As demand for this product has increased, so has the need to ship out more units, obviously. So there is now an FM distributor network, they call it, of retail locations around the country that are able to hold inventory direct shipped from the manufacturer and sell with some of that margin going to them as a result. If you if you are one of these FM affiliates, like I said, you can sell the boards and you can sell only FM accessories. You cannot operate on the boards. You cannot work on them. You cannot fix them. You cannot replace parts on them, and you cannot sell any aftermarket accessories for those boards. The most recent restriction, you're not allowed to sell online. So if you're a retailer that depends on online sales, you are not allowed to sell Onewheels online on your site. You can only sell them in person.
Why?
It's a great question.
I tried to become a Lenovo authorized repair center in 2014 because I actually like the ThinkPad. I like the product, so I figured let me try to fix something that I like. And there was something like that, but in reverse, where if you want to become an authorized repair center, you have to sell their products, and there was a specific minimum that you were required to sell every quarter or every month in order to actually be able to meet that and stay in that program.
Yeah. So
it's very. If I'm supposed to sell your product and I need to sell $20,000 or $60,000 a month of your product in order to be a repair center, I'm not going to tell anybody who walks in the door to fix anything. I'm going to tell them you buy something.
Right.
So it's very annoying.
It seems like the priorities are skewed. Yeah. So there's.
So if in order to be a dealer, you can't sell the product. I mean,
Right.
in order to be if you want to be a dealer, you can't fix the product.
Correct.
That's
All
ridiculous.
you can do is sell the product. I'm not in this program. I don't know anything about it. I have not had any direct interaction with it. If you are caught modifying the board, taking it apart, selling an aftermarket accessory, anything of that sort, you are instantly cut from that network. I don't know the details behind it, but I know that you are removed from that network of shops should they find you in violation of their policy.
That's insane. And I don't think that people understand when they say, why don't you simply become authorized by the company to do X, Y, or Z?
We have tried, not we, but SLS as a group has been reaching out to them constantly ever since the organization was founded, offering in full support. And I personally support this as well. We want to work with FM. We want to fix these problems in an official and an authorized and a traceable way. And when that opportunity isn't provided by the manufacturer and we perceive the demand to still be there, we've served to build our own infrastructure to create it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind paying Apple for schematics. I wouldn't mind paying more than I pay through my current people on Skype that I buy chips or screens from right now to buy through them. But it's like you can't, and most people don't understand that. If you have an iPhone with a bad charge port or a bad headphone jack, even if you become authorized by the manufacturer, you can't buy the headphone jack, you can't buy the power button, you can't buy the charge port. So there's Like, what do you?
Yeah. So all these shops can do is the best with what they're given, and right now we are given quite literally nothing.
Yeah,
from
and
the
it's
manufacturer.
particularly aggravating when they say you can't trust the parts that they probably just got out of a dumpster. It's like, yeah, the reason they're dumpster diving for a part like you are for a motor or grabbing them out
Can't
of
get
used
anywhere else.
devices is you can't buy it from them new if you
Right.
want to.
And even if a shop attempts to establish contact with a manufacturer or with FM about a customer's board they have in, they won't talk to you. They'll ask for the serial number and then they'll start talking to the customer directly. They will not interact with you in any way if they don't have to.
That is so shady.
I would agree.
Dealers have their licenses revoked if they export, even if it's to a country that doesn't have any dealers, and Future Motion don't send one wheels directly to that country.
I was not aware of that.
That was a comment that I read from Max Messenger. Thank you, F. Meister, and thank you, Lyle Spain. What is the VESC module number of the one that you were showing?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head.
Sebastian says, are you coming out this weekend, Josh? I don't know if you know that person.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be in Boston this weekend.
If Future Motion had competition, how likely would it be that they would lose all of its market? With this behavior...
With the public perception that I have gained, I would imagine that transition would occur relatively quickly.
Ask him about the GT board issue with the upper left coil's torque nut getting loose and shorting stuff.
Yeah, so this is the same issue we discussed on the Pint. So remember how this nut exists right here that can pull off the line and either rip out the power button functionality, so now you can't turn your board on and off, and it can damage the Bluetooth module underneath. The same nut is used on the GT, except now I believe it's plastic, not metal. The same problem persists where it can unthread itself and now spin on that wire.
But at least it's not going to, at least if it's plastic, it's not going to destroy the board as much, I imagine.
I would imagine a loose nut is not preferable in any scenario, no matter what it's made of.
Is there some sort of Loctite or anything used on there?
There's Loctite used, by my understanding, on the threads holding components onto the rails.
Red or blue?
Blue.
I like red.
None of it is temperature sensitive.
I don't like...
Red
like
is
commitment.
no-go here. So everything Loctite that I have seen on a one wheel up until this point has been blue. It does not require temperature to remove, thank God.
I like red Loctite. I like committing, and I like committing early. But
you better be doing stuff right the first time.
Paul hates me anytime I need service. So
these nuts right here, specific to this problem on the GT, I know that they are not Loctited on the Pint.
Why?
It's a great question. Blue? Not even blue. So
Jeez.
we can try and pull that one off if you want to see.
Not even having blue Loctite. That's kind of...
If I can even get this one off without cracking
I've
it.
proposed to Future Motion every month for 18 months. They're only listening now because you're helping. Oh, thank you, John Stock. I think everything that I'm talking about here is really just stuff that you've all been already saying. So it's kind of your work that's actually
so
doing
I'm
this.
not actually able to thread this one off because the plastic is already broken from here to here.
Seriously?
Yeah, so for the sake of being on video and doing this quickly, this isn't going to be something that's going to happen immediately.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
But
I was just curious.
By my understanding, they do not have Loctite on either of them.
Josh is a G and hands down the best one-wheel service provider in New England. That's very nice.
I do what I can.
He did not just say these nuts. I'm dead, says Mario Cantino. Oh.
Someone's going to clip that.
Somebody's going to clip that, yeah. There's no way to avoid that. One wheels are backed into a corner because of the form factor itself, meaning that the hub motor tire can't get much bigger because people's feet can only get so wide, also lack of battery space. I emailed them proposals on how we can integrate in a way that is not invasive for them.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to reiterate that point too, we're not wanting to replace FM. We don't want FM to go away. We want to work with FM.
Is Haley a misspelling of Hawley? No.
No, it is not.
A separate person. He is not a...
I'm not a politician.
He is not a politician. He says that as a badge of honor. Let's see. Are the Chinese competitor products any good, says Gerald?
The Chinese manufacturing products that compete with the Onewheel are not manufactured to the same quality specifications, both in terms of hardware and software. They're not targeting the same market to directly compete with Onewheel. They try to slide a little bit underneath of it, in my opinion. So it's not the same level of quality that you'll find with a Onewheel. It's also not the same level of cost.
Well,
Does that answer the question?
that does. Which nuts again, says Chad. Oh, he's trying to bait you.
Yeah, right.
It's going to work, though. That
It
almost
might.
worked on me, actually. Okay, I'm going to be getting out of here to get myself some lunch. Time to go to Casey's Rib Shack and get something to eat. It was a
Gotcha.
pleasure meeting you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
We have some last points to cover here. One final one.
Let's go over this first.
So
Steak and wait.
we've talked about a whole bunch of problems with what's seen, but we're not really talking about, in specific quantifiable terms, what we want. So if we look into here, there's some very specific things that we want that will make a significant impact to rider control over the product that they own. Number one is we want software locks removed, not only from the the new and current versions of the board, but all versions of the board. If you own the product, you own the products, and you own the components inside of it, and it should be your right, again, in my personal opinion, for you to exchange the parts out for the device you have paid for. Separate to that, looking down my list here, any battery amp hour restrictions should be removed. There's no reason, there's no benefit to the consumer by adding a battery amp hour percentage onto a product where no value is gained by doing so.
Any BMS that's halfway competent is going to turn off the battery once one of the cell banks goes to like 2.6 or 2.8 volts.
Correct.
If your BMS is safe, it's already going to be doing that without having that separate limitation on it.
Absolutely. And finally, we want to be able to purchase parts as third parties from the OEM directly. It adds danger, potentially, to be buying used parts off the third-party market, but we don't really have an alternative option. Actually, we don't have an alternative option. If there's a component that needs to be replaced, the only place to source it is by somebody who already has it within the same space we're in. If we're able to access a inventory of parts that are from the manufacturer and made to a certain specification, that is only going to be of benefit to the rider.
Yeah, it's something when I have to get donor boards from China that have a hole through them. Somebody will say, well, how do you know that the board that you're taking that CD3217 off was not tossed in that pile and had a hole put through it because it was not charging and had a bad CD3217? And my answer is, I pray.
Yeah.
So then you grab another one, but you're grabbing another one. It's like, well, what are the chances that it would happen in 3 boards in a row?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've actually had that with 3 donor boards in a row. All had a bad ISL 625
Yeah, it's
or
possible.
something else, and that's how you do it. So you're hoping that when you buy something that's a donor, that the thing you're buying as a donor for the part you want was not thrown away specifically because that part was bad.
You got it.
And you're not going to know if that entire product is dead and not able to turn on.
Unless you manually test it.
Yeah, like I was speaking to a laptop recycler about this a while ago. I'm not going to say the name because he made me promise at the end of it. I was stupid. I said, just out of curiosity, when you get all the stuff in for recycling, I know you're not testing every single effing component in there. So what do you do when you're like, if this got recycled because something didn't work? So how do you deal with that when you're parting it out? And he just kind of starts like giggling, like, we refund the person that got the one part that caused it to not work. Because when you part that device out, they're just going to take a picture of everything, put it online. Mm-hmm. Whichever part didn't work, that person's going to email and say, hey, this didn't work. And then we're like, we just refund them, no questions
They do
asked.
troubleshooting for you.
So it's literally faster and easier to do it that way than it is to actually pay somebody to test every component of some laptop that you may not have test parts to.
Right. I think that similar situation, if you ask certain people who have been in this space for a long time, I believe that situation still exists.
Yeah, I mean and that's how you get stuff. So when they say they care about safety, I mean, if you're going to do this work anyway. People
Absolutely.
out there, you're not going to stop doing this work. You're going to do it one way or the other. At least provide you with the means to be able to do it in a better way without having to go through some junk pile to find your stuff.
I mean, my primary goal is to get people riding how they want to, be it harder, faster, stronger, longer, whatever they want. If you want to ride your Onewheel in a specific way, or your PEV or any electric device, and you are either unable to do so or restricted from doing so from the manufacturer, I want to be of help in that regard.
So you were saying no software locks, no amp hour limitations on the battery, and so that it doesn't just say like you've run out even when your battery still has more than ample space if you upgraded it.
So
and
we
make
want
OEM parts
we
available.
want no serialization protocols. We want no software locks between the devices. We don't want any battery capacity limitations via software, and we want access to manufacture parts directly. I mean, we all love this space more than most. And One Wheel, if you're listening, please listen, because like we very much want to work with you. We have the same goal. We want more people riding One Wheels, and we want One Wheels to last as long as possible, if not forever. But it's not going to happen under the current system, and things need to change.
If they unlocked everything, I think JW batteries would have less means to be generous on these streams, though. I now have an interest in them not releasing their products. Casey's Rib Shack in New Hampshire. Yes, that place is amazing. I'm going to get myself a nice steak. We really play that. Let's see. What else did you have on your list that you didn't go through, if anything?
I don't know if I have any more goodies. We've covered at least the large majority of it.
Is Lewis sitting down, or is the Tom Cruise effect not working? I'm 5'6", so I'm closer to the floor than the ceiling in most places I go into. How can they expect to grow internationally if I'm forced to ship my board to California for something I could replace myself with OEM parts? I don't think that's part of their... I don't think they care.
I would agree with that.
I mean, their actions demonstrate that they don't care, in my opinion. Damn it, now I'm saying in my opinion. I want to get sued.
There you go.
Hit it. Okay.
Yeah, so the only point that I have that we haven't covered yet is a firmware update to the One Wheel Plus during the life cycle of the XR, where the top speed was reduced from 18 to 15 miles per hour. So this is a report we've seen from multiple places of, my Plus just doesn't feel as fast or snappy as it used to be. And it appears that there now seems to be a speed cap of 15 miles an hour.
And I imagine that when you get that firmware update, they don't tell you, by the way, you're going to be losing speed when you do it.
So that there is a lot of debate on how that firmware update actually occurs. There is an argument that it is something the user has to vouch for, and there is an argument that it is something that is automatically pushed to the board without user acknowledgement. The specifics of it are not explicitly known. Again, this is just reports that we have heard.
How would you push it to the board without the user knowing?
So the only way the board can connect to the servers FM has is through the FM app. And if you're constantly using the FM app, then the board has a constant source of information outside of the scope of you.
That's it. That's probably a separate entire 1 hour conversation.
We could talk for days about that.
If you buy a device and it works like this, the company should not be able to reach into your home and take shit out of that and change it. You bought this. You don't get to take something away once somebody's already bought it.
So the link to break that connection to FM is your phone. Is that FM app. So there is a fantastic app out there called OWCE, stands for One Wheel Community Edition. There are other variants of this app that work with equivalent success, but the point of this app is it looks at the Bluetooth conversation between the board and your phone and extracts the information you care about. This means on certain models of the board where the individual cell readings have disappeared, the board's still telling you what those cell readings are. The phone's just choosing to ignore it with that newer version of the app. So that OWCE app restores some of that stripped functionality to the user with certain restrictions.
Like, you shouldn't be able to reach into a person's house after they bought the product and change it without...
I completely agree.
That's insane.
But this is
if you
this
want
is
to
the world we
reduce
live
the
in.
functionality in newer and here's a question I have. I could go for another 2 hours. Like, I know with Apple on an iPhone, you can't revert back to an older version of iOS without a lot of screwery. If you're a normal user and you don't like the new old version, you can't just wipe it like you would with a computer and go back to an older OS. Can you go back to older firmware versions with this?
You cannot restore the firmware version on the board. No,
so
there's not been a way. Correct. But the understandings we have, and there are developments occurring, but to date, you are not able to just go, oh, I want this firmware and put it on the controller. Right, so you can't undo the software locks in that regard.
You can upgrade, but you can't downgrade. I mean, you can...
you have the option to upgrade when the manufacturer presents you the option to do so, but there is no, oh, I don't like this, I want to roll it back. With the app, there are also... So there's hardware and firmware versions on the boards, which are out of frame and on the floor that we're pointing to, but the app also has its own set of revisions. And on an iPhone, it's more difficult to roll back to a previous version of an app. On Android, you just download an older APK, and now you have that older version of the app.
JW Battery says, come to Texas and I'll get you some amazing ribs. That's a very long drive away, though, in case...
But that's a good offer.
Like right down the street, though. Oh, no, you don't need to GoFundMe for me to go to Texas to meet JW. That sounds like a good excuse to finally drive down to Texas and take a road trip. That would be a fun road trip, actually. All right. Well, that is about it for this video.
You're going to have to ride a one wheel if you go to Texas.
That's going to be a long... Lots of recharging.
Absolutely.
I've gotten my electric bike up to, if I don't have a passenger, 300 miles in one charge. With a passenger, 200 miles in one charge.
You're getting a little bit more battery
Just
to get
for
to
the hell of
Texas.
it, just to see if it's like possible. Yep. But I never need that because I make like I use it for a 7-mile commute.
Gotcha.
It was just, I just want to see if I could do it.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's so stupid to actually own that. Anyway, where can people find you if they haven't? Are paying attention to the links in the
Yeah, so
description?
I've got links in the description. I'm most accessible
They can find you
on
on
my
a
Facebook
camera.
page. So that's facebook.com/permawheelie. If you need service and you're in the One Wheel or New England area, or you're willing to ship stuff in, you can find me on StokeLifeServices.com. My Instagram is the same as my Facebook at permawheelie, P-E-R-M-A, wheelie like wheelie on a bike. And I think that's about it.
Thank you so
Cool.
much for
Thank
taking
you so
the
much for your
This is
time.
incredible fun.
100%.
The first 41 minutes that were missed, the moment I get access to real internet, I will upload. I have Comcast in New Hampshire at home. I have Gigabit Fios in New York. Comcast here. So when it will be up, anybody's guess.
Yeah, and if there's more topics to cover, I'm absolutely open to shooting more videos.
Yeah, this will be fun.
This will be a ton of fun.
Thank you so much.
Yep,
Really
thank you.
appreciate it.